Chapter 394. There were no city walls in the Immortal City, other than the majestic celestial dragon mountain standing tall on the north side. The east, west, and south sides were all flat plains. A few large rivers flowed through the plains, and the fertile land was filled with undulating buildings and pavilions. The bustling place could be said to be unparalleled in the world. This was the largest city in the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, and also the city with the largest population in history. Hundreds of millions of creatures gathered here, and the countless joys and sorrows of the human world played out. Perhaps it was because this place was too prosperous and flourishing that there was no city wall in the world that could encircle it. It was like the legendary divine tree that had existed since the beginning of the world, growing uncontrollably and wildly. There were ancient ruins in the Immortal City, and the scale of these ruins was extremely large. There were many traces of ruins on the surface, and the scale of the ruins underground was even larger. There were countless secrets hidden inside, and perhaps there were countless treasures. Of course, there could also be countless dangers and monsters. For so many years, the legend about this ancient ruins had long been deeply rooted in people's hearts, and there were countless versions of it. However, at this time, the rumors were ultimately just gossip, because the big shots of Zhengxi and Meng had cast a spell to seal this ancient ruins many years ago. When the carriage entered the streets of the Immortal City and steadily moved forward, through the curtains on the carriage, Lu Chen's gaze passed over the houses of different heights on both sides of the street, and saw a very tall, but obviously broken statue in the distance. It had huge fangs and a mighty aura. Standing on top of the city, it seemed to overlook all living things, and it had its own domineering aura, like a giant beast pouncing on one's face. Lu Chen stared in that direction from afar in the carriage. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He felt that the already broken eye of the giant beast on the statue seemed to have suddenly come to life at a certain moment and looked into the carriage. It was like a shocking roar in the dark, suddenly exploding in one's mind, causing one's body to suddenly turn cold. But very quickly, that feeling receded like the tide, and there was no more sound, as if it was a dream. Lu Chen's gaze did not leave the statue. After looking at it in silence for a while, he suddenly asked Old Ma, "Is it a white tiger?" Old Ma looked back at the window, then nodded and said, "Well, yes. The place we're going to this time is in the White Tiger District. That mythological beast statue is too tall. No matter how far it is, as long as you are here, you can probably see it if you raise your head. I guess it's the same in our residence." Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma, and a glimmer of light flashed in the depths of his eyes. "How did you feel when you looked at the white tiger statue?" Old Ma was startled for a moment. Then he shrugged and smilingly said, "What can I feel? It's nothing more than a sigh. This statue, together with the other 3 giant statues of mythological beasts in the Immortal City, is said to be originally from this relic. It's just that after so many years, no one can figure out its origin." Lu Chen nodded, his gaze slightly drooping. His expression seemed to have some subtle changes, but very quickly returned to normal. He nodded and said, "Indeed, the person who could create such a giant statue must also be an incomparably powerful race." Old Ma chuckled and said, "Most likely. But who knows? No matter how powerful they are, there are no traces of them now. Perhaps they have encountered some natural or man-made disaster and have already perished." The sound of the carriage carried them away, leaving only the giant white tiger statue that stood majestically under the sunlight. It still stood there motionlessly, as if it was still waiting for something in the quiet years. Their new residence in the Immortal City was still very good. It was on the side of a gentle tributary of the Mirror River, one of the 4 major rivers. This was the depths of the White Tiger District, and the surroundings had long been filled with houses. The carriage first crossed a stone bridge called Horse Washing Bridge, and then went down to a fork in the road. There was a street with 2 opposite alleys. The alley on the left was called Stoneflower Alley. This name sounded a little strange, and no one knew when it was given this name, but it was clearly written as such on a road sign. Entering Stoneflower Alley, There was a row of houses of various sizes. Most of them looked like large mansions with clear facades. There were about 11 or 12 families. The carriage took them all the way to the deepest part of the alley and stopped at the door. The old and lean coachman got off the carriage, went forward to open the door, and directly drove the carriage in. When the door closed, Lu Chun, Old Ma, and Black Dog jumped down from the carriage, and after that, their new home was revealed in front of them. It looked like an ordinary house with two entrances. On the outside, there was a living room, a few small rooms, and it looked like an ordinary family's kitchen, storeroom, and the like. On the inside, there were two rooms in the east and west, and a courtyard in the middle, surrounded by a veranda, just enough for one person to have one bedroom. The whole house was clean and tidy, and very quiet. It looked like a good place to live. Obviously, when Shui Ing from Fuyunji arranged this matter, she had put in a lot of thought. After bringing them here, the old coachman quickly took his leave, and it looked like he was not willing to stay for a long time. It seemed that these two people were scourges in his eyes, and if they stayed too long, they might get into trouble. The courtyard was not very big, but it was enough for Atsu to stroll around for a while. Luchin did not care that Atsu was curiously sniffing and running around the house, and turned to Old Ma and said, "Are we going to stay here?" "Yes, what do you think?" Old Ma replied. Lu Chan said, "It's okay. Anyway, we don't really care about this." "All right, where are the other things?" Old Ma said, "They said that they have everything arranged. They should be placed somewhere in this house." "Oh," Lu Chan said, looking for it. The two of them walked together. They first went to look at the bedroom, and after they were satisfied, they walked through the entire house. Finally, they found a neatly piled goods in a storeroom in front of them. There were so many of them that they looked like a small mountain, and they were about to fill the storeroom to the brim. Other than some daily necessities, most of the things here were food, and they were all neatly stacked. Then, they quickly realized that there was a large amount of valuable demon beast flesh. Obviously, the people in Fuyunji had found out about what Lu Chan said previously. Standing at the door of the storeroom and looking at this small mountain that was much taller than their heads, Lu Chun and Old Ma looked at each other and were speechless for a while. After a while, Lu Chan suddenly said, "Look at this and think about the 10 years that we lived in Qingshutang village, those hard times. Damn, isn't the difference in our lives too big?" Old Ma looked like he was gritting his teeth, and he said bitterly, "Fuyunji is actually so rich here. Damn, I suffered for 10 years for nothing." Lu Chun clicked his tongue and looked at Old Ma with a faint smile. Then, he patted his shoulder and turned around. Old Ma was still depressed, and he glared at the full storeroom angrily. Suddenly, he slammed the door shut and followed behind Lu Chun. At the same time, he scolded, "Corruption." Chapter 395. What was a house? It was just a piece of land surrounded by four walls. A few rooms were built, and a few beds were placed. One could sleep peacefully and shelter them from the wind and rain. Immortal City was the most prosperous place in the world. However, when Lu Chun and Old Ma stayed in their current house, the walls seemed to isolate them from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. The two of them chose their own bedrooms. Lu Chun then went to the storeroom and took out a large piece of meat from an unknown demonic beast and threw it to Atu. As expected, this fellow ran to the courtyard with the piece of meat in his mouth and lay down on the grass by the side of the wall. Then, he began to enjoy the delicious meal by himself with a satisfied expression. When Lu Chun and Old Ma finished tidying up their rooms and settled their luggage, it was already dusk when they returned to the courtyard. They sat at the original stone table and stone bench in the courtyard. Old Ma took out a tea set as if he was performing a magic trick. The kitchen in front of them was boiling hot water, so they made tea together. Lu Chun was a little surprised. He smiled and said, "You actually carry these things with you. I remember that you used to like to drink with me, right?" Old Ma nodded and poured him a full cup of tea. He said, "It's just a habit that I've developed in the past few years. I'm old now, so I don't like to drink much." Lu Chin's hand that was holding the teacup paused in midair. Then he put it to his mouth and took a sip as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, "How old are you? You have a nerve to say that you're old?" He smacked his lips as if he was savoring the aftertaste. After a moment, he said, "This tea is not bad." Old Ma smiled, then sighed and said, "How can we not be old? We've been in this business for more than 10 or 20 years. The two of us can actually be considered to have lived a long life." Luchin thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, I think so." Old Ma clicked his tongue and narrowed his eyes as if he was recalling something from the past. He said, "I remember when I first entered the industry, people told me that if I did well, I would have power and wealth, and that it would be a shortcut to heaven. But no one told me that most people in this industry would have short lives." "Ha! Wasn't it the damn Baldy who pulled you into the business?" Lu Chun asked with a smile. Seeing Old Ma shaking his head, Lu Chun seemed to have recalled something. He smiled and said, "Of course I was dragged into this by that damn Baldy. Back then, he didn't talk to me about power and wealth. From the beginning to the end, he only talked to me about justice and the heavenly Tao." Old Ma couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. Lu Chun smiled and said, "It's funny, isn't it? But you don't say. I really believed him at that time. And if I didn't have this belief, maybe I wouldn't have been able to come back alive from the devil cult." Old Ma smiled and looked at Lu Chun with a gentle and secret pity. He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for him. Lu Chun tapped his fingers on the stone table and looked up at the dusk scenery in the sky. He was lost in thought and didn't speak for a while. After a while, he suddenly heard Old Ma ask, "Then when did you stop believing in these things?" Lu Chun rolled his eyes, squinted at him, pointed at him, and said with a smile, "It was when I lived with you for 10 years. Old Ma quickly spat and said, "Don't talk nonsense. It has nothing to do with me. You don't dare to go out and say this. If it reaches Jinjuan's ears, he will definitely kill me." Lu Chun laughed. Old Ma shook his head and sighed. "I'm old. I really don't want to do it anymore. What about you? I remember you told me before that you don't seem to have the energy. Why did you come all the way here to meet Jinjuan and then decide to do it again?" Lu Chun raised his head and finished the tea in his cup, as if he had just gulped down a bowl of strong liquor. Then he let out a light breath and said with a smile, "That damned Baldy begged me, but I couldn't put aside my pride. Well, maybe I still believe a little of what you just said about the justice of the common people. It would be strange if I believed you." Old Ma scolded with a smile. Night came, and everyone went back to their rooms. After the door was closed, there was only silence and darkness. Atsu's body was now too big. It could no longer stay in bed with Lu Chun like before, so it was naturally chased to the ground. Fortunately, this big black dog had the bloodline of the celestial wolf and was now a holy beast, so it was completely unafraid of the cold on the ground. In addition, it had eaten a large piece of demon beast meat today, so it was full of energy. So soon, Lu Chun heard the sound of snoring coming from Atsu. It seemed that it had fallen asleep. But Lu Chun couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed, opened his eyes, and quietly looked at the darkness. Until dawn. The next morning, Old Ma knocked on the door and said to Lu Chun, "I'm going to find Shuang today. Do you want to come?" At this time, Lu Chun had just gotten up, and the lazy dog Atsu was still lying on the ground, snoring. No one knew how long it would sleep for. Lu Chun called Old Ma to the courtyard and asked, "What's so urgent? We just moved in yesterday, and you're going to find her today?" "I'm going to ask her for money," Old Ma said confidently. Lu Chun was startled and said, "What money? Didn't she already help us settle down here? The food and necessities are also enough." Old Ma sneered and said, "This time, we are people who are going to do big things. How can we not have money and spirit stones? Besides, do you think she's so kind as to arrange so many things for us for no reason?" Lu Chun suddenly became a little curious and asked with a smile, "What do you mean?" Old Ma pointed to the north. From afar, the majestic and tall Mount Tianlong stood majestically like a giant guarding this huge city. And at the foot of Mount Tianlong was where the headquarters of Zheng Xiaming was located. That's because after I went to report your arrival to the Immortal, he personally promised that we would be satisfied this time. As long as we work hard, we will be treated well. Lu Chen's eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands and laughed. "I see. Looks like we can get more than just this." "Of course." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "Just wait and see. If we don't say it, Shuang definitely won't give us money. This time, I'm going to get at least 1 or 2,000 spirit stones to spend first. Lu Chun interrupted him and said, Are you stupid? You only want 1 or 2,000 spirit stones from a divine transformation immortal. At 10 times that. Old Ma sucked in a breath of cold air and widened his eyes. Isn't it too much to ask for so much? If I anger Shuang, she might kick me out on the spot. Lu Chun sneered. This money doesn't belong to her. Needless to say, it must be from Zhengxiameng. If we don't want it, we'll naturally spend it elsewhere. Plus, don't you want to have tens of thousands of spirit stones in your hands and walk around the immortal city with us? Old Ma's expression changed. After a moment, he clapped his hands and said fiercely, You're right. How can we do things without money? That kind of big thing can only be done with a lot of money. Lu Chun nodded repeatedly and said, You finally understood. Congratulations. Old Ma chuckled and turned to walk out. But after a few steps, he suddenly looked back at Lu Chun and said, Hey, Lu Chun. Old Ma said, When you were chatting with me yesterday, you said something about justice for all the people in the world, and so on. Maybe you still believe it in your heart? Lu Chun frowned and said, Yes, I did. Why? Old Ma said sternly, Forget about these things. Trust me, you don't believe in these things anymore. Get lost. Chapter 396. After Old Ma went out, the house suddenly became much quieter. Lu Chun returned to the courtyard and sat down. He glanced at his bedroom. Through the open door, he could see that Atsu, the big lazy dog, was still lying on the ground, snoring loudly. It seemed that the demon beast meat that Shui Ying asked people to prepare yesterday was of high quality. Only after eating this kind of high-quality demon beast meat that was full of spiritual power would Atsu become so sleepy. In fact, it was because its body had absorbed too much spiritual power and needed more time to digest it. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched slightly, and he shook his head. It made him feel a little helpless. For demon beasts like Atsu, which had the incomparably powerful celestial wolf bloodline, as long as it had enough good food, it could often increase its strength just by sleeping. As for the human race, who were now known as the rulers of the divine continent, if they wanted to obtain stronger power, they had to cultivate, and cultivate for their entire lives. Even a powerful divine transformation stage, true monarchs were the same. Every cultivator would almost never stop cultivating throughout their lives. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If one did not advance, one would fall back. Was this another way of saying that humans were inferior to dogs? Well, at least this dog was stupid. As Lu Chun thought of this, he felt a little better. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. After that, he stood up and carefully looked around before walking back to his bedroom and closing the door behind him. After the door was closed, the light in the room became a little darker. However, Atsu, who was sleeping on the ground, didn't notice this. Of course, it could have been aware of this, but with Lu Chun by its side, it was enough to let it relax and sleep peacefully. Lu Chun locked the door, then returned to the side of the bed and lay down. His face was calm as he regulated his breathing. After a while, he put his hand on his chest and closed his eyes. With a hum sound, a white light lit up. At that moment, the light in the space above the bed seemed to distort rapidly. After a moment, Lu Chen's body disappeared. Only a seed quietly fell from the air and gently landed on the soft bedding without making a sound. In the ancient and mysterious tree hole, the same white light flashed, and then Lu Chen's body appeared in the hole. Because he had been here too many times and was too familiar with this place, Lu Chun almost subconsciously adjusted his body in midair. He used his hand to lightly press the ground, and his whole body nimbly stood up. The gray and misty floating tree walls, the quiet and clear puddles, and some of the things he had piled up in the corner looked the same as before. Nothing had changed. Of course, there was also a sense of quietness, or perhaps loneliness. Lu Chun looked around and walked to the water hole in the center of the tree hole. He squatted down and looked into the water. Many years ago, This puddle of water used to be a dark green color filled with dense vitality. Now, it had reduced to transparent and colorless ripples. There used to be nothing in the water, but now there were two things. One was a strange black fire that was still burning in the water, and the other was an aquatic spirit plant. It was the black mud lotus that Atsu stole in Kunlun Mountain. Luchan hadn't paid attention to the movement here for a while. Today, after coming over to take a closer look, he suddenly frowned slightly. He found something unusual. The cluster of black fire was similar to before. There wasn't much change, but the black mud lotus that was originally placed in the water to preserve the quality of its spiritual power seemed to have changed significantly. At some point, one end of the black mud lotus had already pierced into the soil at the bottom of the puddle, while the other end was slightly raised. Looking at the tiny roots that had begun to grow out of the lotus, this aquatic spirit plant seemed to have settled down in the puddle and had begun to germinate again. This made Lu Chun a little surprised. When that stupid dog Atsu stole this spirit plant, he didn't think about preserving it. He dug it out directly and crudely, directly biting off all the original roots. He didn't expect that the black mud lotus could be reborn here. It seemed to be a spirit plant with a very tenacious vitality. But soon, Lu Chan found that there seemed to be something wrong with this black mud lotus. It seemed to be a bit too black. As the name suggested, the black mud lotus grew in the mud, and most of the spirit plants were black in color. This was indeed the case, but in Lu Chin's eyes, the black color had changed a lot compared to the original color. The black color on the body of the black mud lotus was deep and translucent. It was far from the grade of an ordinary spirit plant. It could even be said that the black mud lotus looked like a piece of flawless black jade, with a bit of crystal clarity. This kind of color and light was not ordinary at first glance. But what made Lu Chin's expression more serious was that through the surface of the bright and translucent black, he could faintly feel a familiar aura that quietly resonated with a certain dark power in his body. The power of the black fire? Lu Chan raised his head and looked around the tree hole, then looked at the black fire in the water. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the black fire had infected the black mud lotus, or if the tree hole itself had some kind of mysterious power that he didn't know. He silently pondered for a long time. In the end, he didn't touch the obviously mutated spirit plant and stood up. He walked to the edge of the tree hole, stretched out a hand, and gently stroked the tree wall. He slowly walked forward. The ancient and rough tree wall left a faint response in his palm, but his eyes were looking forward. "See, branch." In the silence, he said to himself, "If this is really a part of the tree of God, then it's probably only 2 leaves away from the evil sect's legendary miracle." There was only silence in the tree hole, and only his voice echoed. Lu Chan raised his head and found that he had already walked to the bottom of the 2 hidden doors on the tree wall. He stared at the door for a long time, and suddenly said, "The legendary tree of God has a spirit. If you were its seed, what would you think? Would you want that leaf to come back here?" The tree hole was still silent. The green gas on the tree wall slowly floated and drifted, as if a little uneasy, but also as if there was nothing unusual. Lu Chan shook his head, turned, and walked towards the water hole, ready to leave. But just as he stepped on the edge of the puddle, the pupils in his eyes suddenly shrank. He abruptly stopped and looked forward. He saw that in this ancient tree hole, the originally slow and misty green gas on the tree wall suddenly floated rapidly and then rushed from all directions in one direction. That direction was right behind him. Lu Chin's body trembled, and after a moment, he suddenly turned around. At this moment, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the originally quiet tree hole. It sounded like the sound of the wind, but it also sounded like the whistling of the wind. In this strange sound, all the green gas on the tree walls rushed towards one direction, and it was impressively one of the 2 strange doors. On that strange door, the green gas gathered together, rolling and twisting incessantly, changing into all kinds of indescribable forms. Until the last moment, all of the green gas gradually slowed down, condensed into a pattern, reflected in the air in front of Lu Chen's eyes. Lu Chen's face suddenly turned a little strange, a little pale. Perhaps he had suddenly discovered the secret of this tree hole that had never appeared before. Or perhaps he had thought of something even further away. He stood in the tree hole for a while, then slowly nodded his head and turned around without saying a word. Oh, a faint white light flashed. This person disappeared in this ancient tree hole. After a moment, the green gas slowly dispersed, reintegrated, adhered to the tree wall, scattered and drifted to every corner, and once again became the same as before. It was as if nothing had happened. All right, I thickened my face and told her that we were going to do something big and needed money. So we needed 30,000 spiritual stones. I'll go. Lu Chun was holding a glass of wine in his hand. Hearing this, he almost spilled the wine on himself. With great difficulty, he grabbed the glass firmly and immediately raised his head to stare at Old Ma. What did you say? How much was it again? Old Ma laughed dryly and stretched out 3 fingers. 30,000 spiritual stones. Lu Chun sized up Old Horse's fat body from head to toe, and then sighed. It's been so many years, but I still haven't seen through you. Damn fat pig. You're even more thick-skinned and black-hearted than I thought. Hey, it's fine if you say I'm thick-skinned and black-hearted, but don't call me a fat pig and curse me. Old Ma sat there and protested unhappily. Lu Chun snorted again. At this time, he casually poured the wine in his hand into his mouth and said sarcastically, Yesterday, didn't you only ask for 1 or 2,000 spiritual stones? Let me tell you, why don't you ask for 10 or 20,000? You ran over yourself and actually added another 10,000 spiritual stones. This is 2. For a moment, he didn't know what to say and could only shake his head. Old Ma shrugged and looked like he was ready to risk everything. This is what I think. Anyway, at this point, there is not much difference between 10,000, 20,000, and 30,000. Why not say 30,000? First, ask for a sky-high price, and then wait for her to return the money. Lu Chun nodded and smiled. What you said makes a lot of sense. Now please tell me, how did our hall leader Shui Ying react when she heard your price? She sat there for a long time and didn't move. After staring at me for a while, she kicked me over and then chased me out. Old Ma said honestly and spread his hands. This is what you meant by a big gain? Lu Chun looked at Old Ma unhappily. Old Ma grunted. He thought for a moment and said, At least we know that Shui Ying can't give us 30,000 spiritual stones, right? Next time when we ask for money, we'll just ask for less. Lu Chun put his hand on his forehead. He didn't want to look at his friend anymore. When the sky gradually darkened, countless houses in the corners of the immortal city lit up one after another. Looking from afar, this city didn't show any signs of being quiet in the night. Instead, it looked even more brilliant under the night sky. Even the night seemed to become noisy and lively under the contrast of the city. Perhaps this was a city that didn't sleep. In the night, many interesting or strange things would appear. Some of these things didn't exist during the day. For example, there were many different shops that closed during the day and only opened at night. In the immortal city, people usually called these places that only opened at night nightclubs. Lu Chun and Old Ma walked on the flat and spacious streets of the immortal city in the night. Looking at the bustling crowd around them, they felt a little emotional. At King Shitang village, the entire village should be asleep by now, right? Old Ma turned and asked Lu Chun. Definitely. In that shabby village, there's nothing to do but sleep. Lu Chun looked at the lively scene around him with interest and sighed. Old Ma laughed happily and said, Hey, seriously, after we finish this job and earn a lot of money, we'll find a corner in this immortal city to stay. What do you think? He sighed and said, There's probably no better place in the world than here. Puffed. Lu Chun said, Wake up. This is naturally the best place in the world, but the people who can live a good life here are all top rich people. Don't you know how much the housing prices in this immortal city are? What right do you have to think about this? Old Ma was stunned. After a moment of silence, he revealed a dejected expression and said, You're right. It seems like we really can't afford it. So don't think about it. Let's go. There's a nightclub in front. Let's go and take a look. Lu Chen pulled Old Ma and walked forward with a smile. Old Ma also chuckled, but then he seemed to think of something and asked Lu Chen worriedly, "Oh right, the two of us ran out like this and left Atsu alone at home. Isn't that bad?" "It's fine," Lu Chen said absent-mindedly. "Don't worry. That guy will sleep until dawn after he's full. He'll be fine." Old Ma glanced at him, then nodded and said, "Oh." At this time, Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up. He pointed to somewhere in front of them and said with a smile, "We're here. I've long heard that the nightclubs in the Immortal City are unparalleled in the world. Let's come and broaden our horizons today." Old Ma turned his head and saw a brilliant and bustling scene in front of him. Beautiful purple and red flowers bloomed in the night, adding a bit of charm to the night. Red lights swayed and fluttered with the wind. A tall building rose from the ground. Countless young and beautiful faces stretched out their red sleeves and laughed on the building. The night gradually darkened, and the lights were brilliant. The lights shone over and seemed to pull their figures over, hiding them in the depths of the lights. Chapter 398. What are we doing here? Old Ma stood in front of the warm and fragrant nightclub. He was grinning from ear to ear. His hands kept waving at the gorgeously dressed girls in front of him. And then he asked Lu Chen in a low voice, "Don't play dumb." Lu Chen scolded. Old Ma tried to explain. He put his hand on his chest and said seriously, "In fact, I haven't been to such a place for a long time." "Huh?" Lu Chen was surprised. He looked at the fat man and frowned. "You've been here before?" Old Ma sighed and said, "When I was young, I was frivolous and bored. I would occasionally come to the nightclub. Well, I mainly wanted to find someone to talk to and relieve my troubles." Lu Chen looked at him more and more disdainfully and said, "You were a frequent visitor to such places when you were young." Old Ma choked for a moment and suddenly became angry out of shame. He glared at Lu Chen indignantly and said, "Aren't you the same? You come to the nightclub with a familiar look. Do you think I can't see it? Not to mention that you dragged me here tonight." Lu Chen sneered and waved his hand. "What do you know? I did come to such places in the past, but because I was on the enemy's side, I had to feign civility. Even in such a place, I kept my mind clear and was careful for the big things." Old Ma snorted and looked like he didn't believe it. He just said, "Cut the crap. Why did you drag me here tonight?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "To do something. The thing that the higher-ups want us to find." Old Ma was shocked, and his face suddenly became serious. He whispered, "What? Yi is here? How do you know?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I don't know. It's not that easy to find. What I mean is, we can't find what the damn Baldy wants us to find in a hurry. We can only explore bit by bit. But if Yi is in those people's hands, maybe what we need to do is to find them first." Old Ma pondered for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "You mean through these nightclubs?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "As time has passed, many of their communication methods must have changed. I don't have much confidence in finding them. However, there are always some things that won't change. For example, after they go into hiding, they will need to do something in the open to make a living. There will probably be people who want to do things that they are familiar with to save energy." Old Ma nodded and said, "That makes sense. Shall we go in and give it a try?" "Okay." Lu Chen walked forward with his hands behind his back. At the same time, he said, "By the way, I don't have any money with me." Old Ma was startled and suddenly became nervous. He was about to speak when he suddenly saw Lu Chen turn his head and smile. He whispered, "Look at the expenses here tonight. Tomorrow, we will go to Shui Ying's place and try to get more money to spend." Old Ma chuckled, and his worries turned into joy. He nodded as if he had suddenly realized something. "Of course." She sang and danced gracefully. Her smile was like a blossoming flower, and the fragrance of makeup and powder permeated the air. In a trance, there was a sudden feeling of emptiness. Lu Chen hugged the smiling woman beside him and smiled as he drank the wine in his glass. The wine was mellow with a trace of bitterness as it burned down his throat. He looked ahead and saw that Old Ma was just like him. He was all smiles and seemed to be in high spirits. He was hugging two young girls, eating fruits and drinking wine. Drinking wine in the land of warmth and gentleness was like being drunk several times in life. Lucien raised his head and looked out the window. The moonlight was just right. The bright moon hung in the sky. It was the best time of the night. He smiled and stood up. His eyes were a little intoxicated. He first whispered to the woman beside him and then reached out to touch her cheek. The girl actually blushed and looked a little shy. She did not stop him. Then Lucien walked out. His steps were a little weak. At the same time, he smiled at Old Ma and said, "You have fun. I'm going to relieve myself. I'll be back in a moment." Old Ma laughed, but did not seem to have time to answer him. He went back to the land of warmth and gentleness. The girls beside him covered their mouths and chuckled. They opened the door for Lucien and pointed him in the direction. Lucien staggered. He seemed to be drunk. His face was a little red. He walked down the stairs. Under the red lantern, his figure looked a little hazy, but also a little lonely. It was already late at night. Even though the nightclub was still in the middle of a party, the courtyard downstairs was still surrounded by darkness and silence. Lucien quietly turned around from the darkness. As the darkness swallowed his figure, his eyes suddenly became clear and bright. His eyes also became sharp as he coldly looked around. He examined the quiet courtyard. There were rockery, ponds, trees, and bushes of flowers. There were sounds of laughter coming from the pavilion in the distance. If he listened carefully, he would probably be able to tell that one or two of the voices belonged to that damned fatty. Lucien moved his body in the darkness. Like a shadow passing by, he came to the side of a few trees in the courtyard. He quickly but carefully examined them. He even touched the roots of several trees with his hand. But after a moment, he stood up and seemed to have found nothing. Lucien took a few steps forward. This time, he came to the side of the pond in the courtyard. There was a stone railing here. Lucien bent down and put his hand directly into the water. He pressed a few times under the water. A few ripples spread out. Lucien didn't know what he sensed in the water, but he quickly jumped up and returned to his original position. He looked like a guest standing by the side of a pond, looking at the scenery in the water. The moon in the sky was originally reflected in the water, but at this moment there were some ripples. It was a little messy and began to shake. In the courtyard ahead, there were two figures talking and laughing. They stopped about 10 feet in front of him. With the moonlight, it seemed that they were two girls. "Mister, why are you standing here?" a young girl asked Lucien with a surprised look on her face when she saw him. Lucien put his hand on his forehead and shook his head. "I drank too much. I came out for a walk." The two girls looked at each other and then said at the same time, "Then let us help you back." Okay. After an hour, the two men walked out of this gentle place and walked to their home in the distance under the cover of the night. "Hey, why are you so strange?" When there was no one else around, and only the two of them were on the long and dark street, Old Ma said to Lucien angrily, "People who go to the nightclub to play at this time, why would they leave and go home?" Lucien said with a smile, "I'm worried about Atsu. I better go back and have a look." Old Ma snorted and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me the truth." Lucien said, "This is not the place we were looking for. Let's go." Old Ma was startled. The drunkenness on his face seemed to have sobered up a little. He said, "Are you sure?" Lucien said, "Yeah, more or less." Old Ma looked at him and suddenly said, "You seem to have changed a lot since you came back." Lucien looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma did not answer him. He only walked forward in silence for a while. Then he suddenly said, "When you were in King Shutang village, did you go to see Ding Dang?" "Yes, I did." "Yeah. How was it?" "There was grass growing on the grave. I pulled it out for her and tidied it up. I also talked to her for a while." Old Ma looked at him. He wanted to say something, but stopped. Then he sighed and walked forward. "Let's go home." Chapter 399. In the dark of the night, Lucien and Old Ma walked side by side. For a while, neither of them spoke. Just like that, they walked across the long street. When they reached the horse-washing bridge, Old Ma suddenly stopped in the middle of the bridge and listened for a while, then looked down. Lucien paused and said, "Why aren't you walking?" Old Ma pointed to the river under the bridge and said, "Look, doesn't this river look like Qingshui Creek?" Qingshui Creek was the stream in King Shutang village. Lu Chun and Old Ma had lived there for 10 years, so of course they knew. He walked to the edge of the bridge and looked down. He saw that the tributary was indeed very calm and quiet. In the darkness of the night, there was almost no sound of water splashing. It was really similar to the small stream in the mountain village in the past. However, Lu Chun did not laugh. He only looked at the stream under his feet. After a while, he shook his head and said, "This river is much bigger than Qingshui Creek and much deeper. It doesn't look like it." Old Ma was startled. A trace of surprise flashed across his face. His expression was also a little complicated. After a while, he seemed to sigh and said, "Seems like you don't miss the 10 years you lived in Qingshui village." "There's nothing to miss," Lu Chun said faintly. "In those 10 years, we just hid like turtles, desperately avoiding the pursuit of the devil cult. Day and night, we were always like a string that was stretched taut. When we saw a stranger, we would suspect whether he was a killer or not. What's so good about these days of fear?" He paused for a while and turned his head to look into the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "Not to mention that I still had my old injuries. Every now and then, they would act up and it was unbearable. So you want to ask me about those 10 years? I don't like it at all." Old Ma nodded silently and said, "What you said does make sense. But as far as I'm concerned, sometimes I feel that staying in Qingshui village for 10 years made me far away from right and wrong, far away from scheming, not to mention killing and arson for a living. So now that I think about it, I don't think those days were too hard." Lu Chun looked at him and suddenly smiled. "Why did you suddenly think of the past?" Old Ma also laughed. He patted the stone railing on the bridge beside him, then walked forward and said, "I'm probably a little old." He walked down the bridge, but when he was 5 or 6 steps away, he suddenly heard Lu Chun call him from behind. Old Ma stopped and turned around in surprise. "What's wrong?" Lu Chun walked over and frowned slightly. Looking at Old Ma's face, his expression seemed to be more serious and dignified than before. He said, "You've said this to me several times recently. You're not in a good mood." Is that so?" Old Ma was a little surprised. It seemed like he didn't notice what Lu Chun said. Lu Chun stared at him for a while and then said calmly, "Don't say this again, especially not in front of our perfected cultivator, understand?" Old Ma's expression changed slightly as if he thought of something. The corner of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to say something, but he saw that Lu Chun had already turned around and walked towards the alley. Looking at Lu Chun's back, Old Ma wanted to say something but stopped himself. For a moment, his expression seemed to have become unusually subtle and complicated. After returning to the residence, or rather, back to their home, they didn't say a word. When the door was closed and they were finally separated from the outside world, they probably felt a sense of relief. In the deep courtyard at night, their rooms were far away from each other. When they arrived here, Lu Chun first greeted Old Ma and was ready to return his room. But at this time, Old Ma suddenly stopped him and looked at the door, saying, "Where's Atsu? Is he still sleeping inside?" Lu Chun smiled and said, "It's so quiet around here. He's probably still sleeping like a dead pig." Old Ma also smiled, but he quickly put away his smile and said to Lu Chun, "What you said to me just now is quite good. I'll remember it all." Lu Chun nodded with a smile and didn't say anything. Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "But tonight, I actually have a question in my heart that I want to ask you." Lu Chun said, "Well, go ahead." Old Ma looked at his eyes and said, "It's still the same question. Why did you choose that nightclub?" Without waiting for Lu Chun to explain, he waved his hand and said, "We already have this kind of relationship. You don't have to say those nonsense to me. Immortal City is so huge and prosperous. There are countless nightclubs of all sizes. Even though we may have the opportunity to find traces of the evil sect's evil people on this road, but no matter what, it's impossible to really find them one by one like this." He stared at Lu Chun and slowly said, "So, how did you determine that it was that nightclub? Or is it that you're actually just saying it casually and just went there to have fun?" Lu Chun's eyes slightly drooped, and after a moment, he suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, I just went there to have fun and to see if there's any chance to find any traces, but if there's none, then forget it." Old Ma seemed a little surprised and said in astonishment, "Really like this?" "Yes, yes," Lu Chun said. "Those people from the evil sect are not so easy to find. Otherwise, wouldn't the remnants of the evil sect in this immortal city have long been caught and killed by Shuang?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, you're right." Lu Chun laughed, turned around and walked toward his own bedroom, and at the same time said with a smile, "Go back early and rest. Don't think too much." "Lu Chun, do you really believe what True Monarch said?" Old Ma suddenly interrupted him. Lu Chun's footsteps were 3 steps away from his door when he suddenly froze and then stopped. In this quiet and serene courtyard in the dead of night, the two of them looked like illusory shadows. "Do you really believe what he said? That legendary tree of God, its branches, leaves, seeds, divine weapons and treasures, and with the power of us mortals to try to destroy that kind of creation divine object? Do you really believe it?" Old Ma's voice reverberated in the courtyard. The darkness around Lu Chen's body suddenly seemed to thicken, as though his body was obscured, making it difficult for people to see his face clearly. After an unknown period of time, Lu Chun was heard saying calmly, "I believe it." Old Ma did not speak, only looked at him. Lu Chun waved at him, then turned and walked to the door, pushed it open, and walked in. After a moment, the 2 doors closed behind him, blocking Old Ma's view. Old Ma's throat moved. His expression seemed a little nervous. After standing silently on the spot for a moment, he also walked out of his bedroom, but when he pushed open the door for some reason, his hand suddenly trembled a little. After a long time, with a creak, he pushed open his door and walked in. Standing in his bedroom, Lu Chun noticed at first glance that Atsu did not seem to be sleeping peacefully on the ground. Then he subconsciously looked at the bed, and sure enough, he saw a pair of shining green eyes in the darkness, looking at him. Lu Chun smiled and walked over to sit on the bed. He hugged Atsu, who had been lying on the bed for some time, and patted its head. Atsu also gently rubbed its head against Lu Chun's body, but suddenly Lu Chun found that Atsu's eyes had never moved away from a certain direction. Even when he just came in, it seemed to be looking at that direction, at the door, or somewhere outside the door. He glanced at Atsu. The smile on his face slowly disappeared, and his eyes became a little colder. Then he followed Atsu's silent gaze and looked at the closed door. And outside the door, if he remembered correctly, after crossing the dark and deep courtyard, it was Old Ma's bedroom. Atsu had been here, staring in that direction. Chapter 400. Old Ma pushed open the door. His body stiffened for a moment, but he still walked in expressionlessly and closed the door behind him. The bedroom was very dark. After all, it was already late at night. However, in the darkness, there was a huge figure sitting there silently. It was like a small mountain. At first glance, it even gave people a feeling that they had to look up to it. It was as if the black figure occupied half of the entire room. Old Ma stood at the door with his head lowered and his hands hanging on both sides of his body. He looked very submissive. After a moment, the voice of the dark figure came from the darkness in front of him. It said, "You're back." Old Ma said respectfully, "Yes." "Where did you go tonight?" "I went to a nightclub with Lu Chun." Old Ma answered calmly and clearly. Then, without hiding anything, he told the whereabouts of himself and Lu Chun that night. The dark figure listened silently and did not interrupt at all. It was not until Old Ma finished that he asked, "Is there anything strange about that nightclub?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "I don't think so. At least, I didn't find anything suspicious. When I came back, I asked Lu Chun, and he said it wasn't here." The huge dark figure was quiet for a while, as if thinking about something. Old Ma seemed to be in awe of the figure. He stood there and waited obediently. After a while, the figure in the dark suddenly moved and seemed to lean forward a little. For some reason, at that moment, Old Horse suddenly felt a little dry in his throat. In his daze, he had the illusion of a mountain collapsing on top of him. However, of course, in the darkness, there was no real mountain falling down. On the contrary, there was a strange flash of light. If one looked carefully, they would find that it should be a shiny, bald head. Old Ma lowered his head even more. In front of the bald True Monarch, he really seemed like a tiny ant. Sometimes he would wonder why Lu Chun seemed to be able to act so freely in front of this giant, who looked up to him, even though Lu Chun looked about the same as him. Lu Chun called him damn baldy every day. Old Ma had even seen him curse in front of this immortal. But every time, it seemed that the immortal did not mind and forgave him. It seemed that he was very tolerant of him. Why was that, Xiao Ma? A call in the darkness woke Old Ma up from his thoughts. He quickly answered. In the darkness, Immortal Tianlan's eyes were as deep as the sea. It seemed that he could never see what was hidden at the end. He looked at Old Ma and asked, "Do you believe in Lu Chen's words?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and then asked tentatively, "Which aspect are you talking about? Looking for clues about the nightclub, or both? I just want to ask you, do you still believe in him?" Sitting in the darkness, Immortal Tianlan said calmly. For some reason, Old Ma suddenly remembered that not long ago, he seemed to have asked Lu Chun almost the same question. Until now, he still remembered Lu Chen's expression when he looked at him. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said to Immortal Tianlan respectfully, "Of course I still believe in him." Immortal Tianlan took a deep look at Old Ma and then nodded. He leaned back and disappeared in the darkness again. In the West Wing, Lu Chun sat on the bed, and Tu lay next to him. In the darkness, the black dog's eyes were bright and full of life, flashing with a dark green light as it stared in the direction of the door. Lu Chun gently stroked the fur on Atsu's back. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was thinking about something. Once, Atsu suddenly stood up and seemed to want to run out, but was stopped by Lu Chun. He wrapped his arms around Atu's body. Even though he didn't use much strength, Atu's abnormally strong body stopped immediately. He turned around to look at Lu Chun. Lu Chun's expression was calm. He lowered his voice so that only Atu could hear him. "Did you feel something?" He pointed at the door. Lu Chun's eyes were wide open. Atu was stunned. Lu Chun's expression was calm. Atsu nodded. Lu Chun smiled and said, "Don't go there. No matter who it is, they probably don't want us to know, whether it's that person's intention or Old Ma's. I just want to see what Old Ma will say to me tomorrow, or maybe he won't mention it at all." Atsu lowered its head slightly and whispered. Lu Chun shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I don't think Old Ma will hurt me. If he wanted to hurt me, I would have died countless times in the past 10 years. This night was quiet and long, but no one stepped out of their room. In this way, in the silence, they waited for the morning light on the horizon. Facing the morning light, Old Ma opened the door and walked into the yard. He stretched his body and suddenly turned his head. He was a little surprised and said, "Hey, you got up so early?" On the other side of the yard, Lu Chun got up earlier than him. At this moment, he was holding a piece of monster meat in his hand. He cut it into several pieces with a sharp knife and threw it in front of Atsu, who was drooling. Then he walked over and said with a smile, "I can't help it. This dog felt hungry early in the morning and pestered me for food." Old Ma looked at Atsu with some amazement and said, "Atsu is not simple. He can eat so much. Moreover, that's high-grade demonic beast meat. Even us cultivators can't eat that much every day." Lu Chun waved his hand and said with a smile, "Monsters are animals. They're not smart, so naturally their bodies are better. It's not strange." Old Ma also laughed, and then asked Lu Chun to sit down at the stone table in the yard. He looked at him and said, "How did you sleep last night?" A glimmer flashed in the depths of Lu Chun's eyes, but he didn't show it on his face. He said with a smile, "It's okay. I slept until dawn. What about you?" Old Ma said with a smile, "Me too. Sigh, I'm getting old. When I was young, I used to go to that kind of place to play. Every time I played, I would stay up all night without sleeping. But when I came back yesterday, I fell asleep the moment I went to bed. I don't know anything." Lu Chun was silent for a moment. He nodded and said with a smile, "Not bad, not bad. It's good to sleep well." Old Ma laughed and changed the topic. He said, "What are you going to do next? We have settled down here. Since Lord True Monarch has ordered us to do something, we have to try our best to do something." Lu Chun said, "Of course. I'm also counting on this to get the qualification to retire for the rest of my life from that damn baldy." He paused for a moment, then smiled and said, "How about this? You should go find Shuang and ask for a lower price from yesterday. See if you can get some money out of it. This way we can do things easier. As for me, I'll just secretly investigate in the city. See if I can find some clues related to the evil cult." Old Ma looked at him and said, "Do you have a plan?" Lu Qin hesitated for a moment. He said, "I have a little idea, but it's not that simple. I still need to look carefully. If I have enough money, it'll probably be faster." Old Ma looked at him. He nodded and stood up. He said, "Okay, I'll go now." Chapter 401. Old Ma went out, and when he left, he looked both happy and worried. Lu Qin guessed that Old Ma was happy that he might be able to swindle a large sum of money, but worried that he would have to see Shuang, who was known to be difficult to deal with. He didn't know if he would be chased out in disgrace again. Lu Qin didn't care about this at all. In any case, he wasn't the one going. Old Ma, that damn fatty, was born to do this kind of work. It didn't matter if he was scolded a few times. However, when Old Ma was about to leave, he still very politely and amicably sent him to the door and watched as Old Ma left the alley. This made Old Ma feel somewhat flattered, and he asked Lu Chun a few questions about whether he had taken the wrong medicine today. Lu Chun just laughed and scolded him. After joking around for a while, he watched Old Ma's figure disappear into the distance of the alley. He turned around and closed the door, then walked all the way back to the courtyard and sat down. Atsu was still lying in the corner of the courtyard, gnawing on the demon beast meat. While he was enjoying it with great relish and satisfaction, he would occasionally raise his head to look at Lu Chun. Lu Chun didn't do anything. He just sat there quietly. The smile on his face disappeared, and he just sat there calmly, expressionless for a long time. The courtyard was silent. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Chun suddenly stood up and walked forward. However, he didn't walk in the direction of his own bedroom. Instead, as if by accident, he went around a corridor and walked to the east wing, which was outside Old Ma's room. The door was closed, but it wasn't locked from the outside. Because the person who lived here had gone out to collect debts, the door should be unlocked. It was impossible that the door could be locked from the inside after Old Ma left. Lu Chin's footsteps paused in front of Old Ma's door. For a moment, there seemed to be a trace of strangeness in the depths of his eyes, but after a moment, he still very calmly reached out his hand, as if he had walked out of his own house, and used his hand to push the door. With a creak, the door gently opened inwards. Sunlight shone from behind Lu Chun, entering the closed bedroom. At the same time, Lu Chin's figure formed a long shadow at the door. Everything in the room was reflected in Lu Chin's eyes. The layout of this room was similar to that of Lu Chin's room in the West Wing. At the very least, the layout, furniture, and decorations were almost the same. Of course, there was no one in the room at the moment. It looked like an ordinary room. Lu Chun didn't immediately step into the room. He stood at the door, and his eyes began to sharpen, scanning every corner of the room little by little. But everything looked so normal and peaceful, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Lu Chin's eyebrows slowly furrowed, as if he was a little hesitant to enter the room to investigate further. But at this moment, Lu Chun suddenly noticed something. Unknowingly, the surroundings had become completely quiet. It was a complete silence without a single sound. If he remembered correctly, not long ago, Atsu was still lying in the corner of the courtyard behind him, happily chewing on pieces of demon beast meat. But at this moment, not even a little sound could be heard. A wave of coldness suddenly arose from his heart and enveloped his entire body like a block of ice. But right when Lu Chun was about to abruptly turn around and put his entire body on guard, a warm voice sounded out from behind him. The voice was deep and gentle, and it even carried a trace of a smile. It was as if the voice had seen a friend and said, "Are you looking for me?" Lu Chin's body suddenly froze. The sun shone on him, and there was a warm aura. It seemed to be a good day. Lu Chun took a deep breath and turned around slowly, only to see perfected Lord Tianlan. He was still fat and burly. Just like before, he still liked to sit. He just sat on the grass in the courtyard, as if he suddenly occupied half the space of the courtyard. Atu, who had been eating in the corner of the courtyard, was now curled up in a corner, not making a sound. All the hair on his body was standing on end as he stared at the bald, fat man. He seemed extremely nervous. Lu Chan was silent for a moment, then walked over. He first came to Atsu and touched its head. Atsu glanced at him and calmed down, but it was still very vigilant when it looked at Supreme Tianlan. Then, Lu Chun walked to Supreme Tianlan and said, "When did you come?" "Just arrived." Perfected Lord Tianlan said with a smile and an amiable expression. Perhaps it was just as Old Ma thought. He still regarded Lu Chun with special respect. Lu Chun stared at him for a while and said, "What did you say just now?" "I was looking for you," Supreme Tianlan said, "didn't you?" Lu Chun was silent for a moment, then said, "Was it you who came last night?" "Yes, I was," Supreme Tianlan admitted frankly and said, "There's something I want to ask Xiao Ma. I wanted to see you too, but it's getting late, so I didn't go over to call you." Lu Chun nodded expressionlessly and said, "No wonder, but you probably left some traces on purpose last night. Otherwise, Atsu, that stupid dog, wouldn't be able to detect your traces." Supreme Tianlan smiled and looked at the big black dog in the corner of the courtyard, saying, "Is this the dog that you always want to bring with you? It looks good." Lu Chun frowned and said, "It's okay. It's mainly because I've raised it for a long time and don't want to be separated again. You know, it's hard for us to completely trust someone as a shadow, and it's not easy to have a dog." Supreme Tianlan nodded and said, "You're right." Then he smiled and said, "This dog must have had some fortuitous encounter. It seems that it has awakened a demon beast bloodline, and its grade is extraordinary. It seems to be a descendant of the heavenly wolf in the Great Snow Mountain." Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. His hands that were hanging by his side subconsciously clenched a little and then slowly loosened. Supreme Tianlan waved at him and gestured for him to come closer. Lu Chan came and sat down in front of him. Supreme Tianlan looked at him kindly and said, "How is it? Are you used to living here?" "It's pretty good. It's not like you don't know what I did in the past." "What kind of life haven't I seen? Now that I have a house and food, it's not too comfortable," Lu Chen replied. "Yes." Supreme Tianlan smiled and thought for a moment before saying, "Ever since you came back, I've actually wanted to have a good chat with you. But it didn't seem appropriate at that time. Either there was an outsider or I had something urgent to do and didn't have time. Today, I finally have some spare time. How are you? Nothing urgent, right?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Of course I'm fine. But you're a soul formation perfected lord. Why do you have to talk to me so much? Just tell me to do something." Supreme Tianlan stared at him and didn't seem to be angered by his words. He just smiled gently and said, "It's been so many years and we've been apart more than together. There are even fewer opportunities for us to really chat. Sometimes, I feel that there's an indescribable barrier between us, right?" Lu Chan didn't say anything, but his hands and his sleeves slowly clenched. "Why is that?" Supreme Tianlan seemed to be a little regretful and emotional. "You're a talent that I've cultivated and I've always valued you. Of course, the task that I asked you to do more than 10 years ago was too difficult and dangerous. But you're really more outstanding than I thought and did a better job than I imagined. I'm really gratified and happy." Supreme Tianlan looked at Lu Chun sadly and said, "So, can you tell me why you seem to be a little wary of me? Tell me, will you?" This gentle and bald divine transformation stage perfected Lord sat in front of Lu Chun like a towering mountain as he spoke to him. Chapter 402. Why was that? Lu Chun lowered his gaze and looked at the ground in front of him. A few stalks of tender grass poked their heads out of the soil, as if they were looking at the world curiously. They were completely unaware of the unimaginable hardships and suffering that existed in the distance outside. When did they become estranged? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him calmly and even spoke with a hint of sincerity. This was a rare thing for a perfected lord of the divine transformation realm. From this, it could be seen that Lu Chun was indeed different from others in his eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "All these years, I don't remember lying to you about anything, whether it was when you were in the devil cult or later when you left the devil cult to hide your tracks. As long as it's something I promised you, I remember I've done it all, right? To be honest, I've never lied to you, so I've always been puzzled. Why do you feel estranged from me? At this point, perfected Lord Tianlan sighed softly and said, I know, you should be a little dissatisfied with me, but it's not too serious, at least not to the point of falling out with me. In the past few years, as long as I asked, although you would scold me from time to time, such as damn Baldy and so on, you would still help me in the end. So I think the friendship between the two of us should still exist. But it's also because of this that I want to know, why do you feel dissatisfied with me? Did I do something wrong? Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chun and continued to ask straightforwardly. Lu Chun remained silent for a long time, and perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be exceptionally patient. He kept waiting and looked at Lu Chun quietly. After a long time, Lu Chun suddenly said, How old was I when you first met me? Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment, as if he didn't expect Lu Chun to suddenly ask this question. After pondering for a while, he said, I remember that you should only be 4 or 5 years old at that time. Lu Chun nodded slowly and said, I still remember what happened when I was young very clearly. Back then, when you found me and took me away, I was very grateful to you. I believed in you, loved you, respected you, and made up my mind to repay you. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm, and it was impossible to tell if he was happy or sad. Lu Chun continued, So, after you raised me up and taught me all my skills, you asked me to go to the evil cult to be that shadow. I didn't think too much and went. You've told me many things in the past, and I remember them all. He glanced at perfected Lord Tianlan and said with a smile, All living beings in the world, righteousness, getting rid of evil for the people, going through fire and water. I really believed in these words more than 10 years ago. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment. The gentle smile had already disappeared from his eyes. However, the way he looked at Lu Chun still seemed to be flickering with a reserved gentleness. He said softly, These are all righteous things. I don't know what you're thinking right now, but if you still want to believe in these words, it's fine. These words, these principles are not wrong, he said calmly. Lu Chun looked up at him and suddenly sneered. Do you believe it yourself? This time, it was perfected Lord Tianlan's turn to be silent. However, his silence was much shorter than Lu Chun's. After a while, he suddenly sighed and didn't directly answer Lu Chun's question. Instead, he said with some emotions, It's been many years since someone dared to question me like this. Lu Chun didn't say anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him for a while and suddenly smiled. Actually, it's not very important whether I believe it or not. Even if I say what I think, you might not believe me if you're prejudiced against me, right? He paused for a moment before continuing. I'm just doing what I think I should do and what I want to do. After so many years, I can only say that I have a clear conscience. Are you satisfied with this answer? Lu Chun smiled and didn't reply either. Perfected Lord Tianlan said again, I've answered your question. What about the question I asked you before? Why do you seem to be dissatisfied with me? Lu Chun was silent for a moment before saying, You've done almost everything you promised me before. I admit that. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. Lu Chun continued, When I was a shadow in the fiend cult, there were countless difficulties and dangers. However, I didn't think too much about it. At that time, I was probably thinking about completing the mission you gave me and contributing to the righteous path of the world. That was the only way I could persevere. You did well, very well. Perfected Lord Tianlan said. Later on, when I was done with my mission and returned, you arranged for me to hide in that small village. Lu Chun said indifferently. In that village, I saw the lives of some ordinary people. At a certain time in a certain year, I suddenly thought of something. Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brows slightly. What is it? Lu Chun said. Why did you choose me when you were young? Perfected Lord Tianlan hesitated for a moment before replying frankly. That's because you're talented enough. For someone of my status, if you weren't so talented, you wouldn't have attracted my attention. Lu Chun nodded. That's because I was lucky. However, after more than 10 years, when I was tortured by the black flame curse in that small village, I suddenly had a thought when I saw the children running around and playing games all day long. I wanted to ask you. Perfected Lord Tianlan asked. What do you want to ask? Lu Chan said, if I didn't go to the fiend cult to be a shadow, what would I be like now? He looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and asked calmly, why didn't you take me in as your disciple? My talent and innate talent are clearly better than countless people. In terms of temperament, I respected you greatly and would definitely not do anything disobedient. Why didn't you give me a peaceful and smooth life? The muscles on Perfected Lord Tianlan's wide cheeks seemed to twitch slightly, but he still listened to Lu Chan expressionlessly. Lu Chan retracted his gaze and looked at the grass on the ground in front of him. He said lightly, I've been to your Kunlun party and even hung around there for a long time. Therefore, I can confidently tell you that if you had taken me in as your disciple back then, I would definitely have achieved more than the bunch of trash in the Kunlun party today. If that's the case, why did you still want me to go to the fiend cult? I've never been able to figure this out. Lu Chun said. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chun quietly. After a while, he said, I asked you to go to the fiend cult because no one in the world is more suitable than you. So, you'd rather me risk my life for more than 10 years and even suffer from the black flame curse for many years after escaping? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, your sacrifice is worth it. Lu Chan suddenly smiled and said, if I told you that I didn't want to sacrifice and wanted to go to the Kunlun party to live and cultivate in peace, I think I would be stronger than the few most powerful people in the young generation of your Kunlun party. But you have never given me this opportunity. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned, as if he didn't know what to say for a moment. However, Lu Chan didn't seem to let it go. He even leaned forward and got closer to Perfected Lord Tianlan. He stared into his eyes and said slowly, so, after thinking about it, it seems that what you asked me to do is not for the righteousness of the world, but for yourself, right? Is it? Lu Chan asked. At this moment, the atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became tense after he asked that question. No one spoke again. Even Atsu, who was hiding at the side, seemed to feel something and shrank his head. Chapter 403. Perfected Lord Tianlan remained silent for a long time. During this time, he had been staring at Lu Chun. It seemed that after such a long time, it was the first time that he had discovered something about Lu Chun that he didn't know or hadn't discovered yet. His eyes looked very strange and complicated, as if there were many emotions mixed together. It was as if one could see all kinds of joy, anger, confusion, and so on. However, when one looked closely, one would feel that there was actually a deep sea in the depths of his eyes. It was deep and vast, but there was nothing in it. It was so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. Perhaps there was no one in this world who could see through his heart. At least, Lu Chun couldn't. After a long time, Perfected Lord Tianlan slowly opened his mouth and broke the silence that had enveloped the surroundings for a long time. His tone was still calm, but the gentle and cheerful tone that he often used when talking to Lu Chun was gone. He became flat. I didn't expect that you would say such things to me. When Perfected Lord Tianlan said this, he shook his head slightly and looked disappointed. It's okay to suspect me, but it's stupid to criticize me to my face. I had high hopes for you. You did exceptionally well in the matter of the devil cult back then. Even I couldn't find any fault with you. But now, what good does it do for you to criticize me to my face? You can't even think through such a simple matter. Have you become stupid after living in seclusion for the past 10 years? When he said the last few words, Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression even became a little stern. Lu Chun smiled. It seemed that in front of this powerful perfected Lord of the Divine Transformation Realm, he really didn't have much fear. He looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said lazily, Why? I just said a few words and you're already anxious? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head helplessly again. I'm not anxious. I'm just a little disappointed with the way you handled this matter. Lu Chan suddenly said, If you don't like me, then just send me away. A hint of anger flashed across perfected Lord Tianlan's face. After a moment of silence, he stood up abruptly. However, just as he was about to walk to the door, he suddenly paused and looked back at Lu Chun with a frown. Then, the anger on his face suddenly dissipated, and he slowly said with a smile, "Why do I suddenly feel that you've been trying to provoke me intentionally or unintentionally?" Lu Chen's hands hung by his side. He slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves, but his palms were already covered in cold sweat. However, this did not affect his expression. He lowered his head slightly and put on a submissive expression again. There is no such thing. Looking at Lu Chun, perfected Lord Tianlan's expression gradually turned gentle again. There seemed to be a few more emotions in his eyes. There was a hint of mockery, but also a hint of gratification and happiness. Whereas little Ma, perfected Lord Tianlan, suddenly changed the topic, as if he did not want to continue talking about this with Lu Chun. Lu Chun secretly heaved a sigh of relief, but his expression did not change much. He said, he went to Fuyunji to look for Hall Master Shuang for money. For money? Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and then nodded. Oh, it's that matter. Shuang did mention it to me. I say, aren't the two of you a little too greedy? Although that matter might cost a lot of money, isn't it a little too much to ask for so much all at once? No wonder Shuang came to complain to me indignantly. Lu Chen's expression did not change. He quickly continued, it's easier to do things with money. Only then can things be done quickly and well. Perfected Lord Tianlan sneered and said, nonsense. You can't fool anyone with this. Who came up with the idea of this price? You or little Ma? Lu Chun did not hesitate to shift the blame to perfected Lord Tianlan. Ma Xiaoyan said it. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked a little doubtful. He took another look at Lu Chun and said, why do I feel that it's more like your idea? Lu Chun said seriously, I've been living a poor life for so many years. I've long gotten used to it. Money is also a worldly possession to me. I don't care about it. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed a little stunned. He said, you're that nice? Lu Chun nodded solemnly and said, yes. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment and suddenly laughed. He then sighed and said, I understand. I'll talk to Shuang later. I'll give you 10,000. Lu Chun raised his eyebrows and said, old Ma asked for 30,000. That's more like it. Perfected Lord Tianlan snorted and said, Fuyunji's money doesn't come from the wind. What's more, there are so many eyes in Zhengxiameng staring at us. They can't wait to take back every spirit stone we spend and check it carefully. We're already giving you face by giving you 10,000. Okay? Okay, thank you. Lu Chun immediately changed his stance and nodded to express his thanks. Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment and then shook his head with a smile. He then pondered for a moment and took out a piece of white paper from his bosom and handed it to Lu Chun. Lu Chun took it and roughly glanced at it. He saw that there were many words written on the white paper. The contents recorded the names of many people and their respective identities, residences, personalities, and even the level of their cultivation. What's this? Lu Chun looked up and asked Perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, in the past few years, we've specially investigated a group of people. We've gotten rid of those who have solid evidence of colluding with the devil cult. But there are still some people we're not sure about. We have some suspicions, but we don't have any evidence, so it's really hard to deal with them. Since you're here to do that, you might be able to investigate from among these people as well. Lu Chun glanced at the name list on the white paper and then nodded and said, I'll go find them. Okay. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him one last time and then turned to leave. From the beginning to the end, they never mentioned the barrier that they once argued about, as if the problem had never existed. Old Ma only came back in the afternoon when it was almost dusk. He looked very happy. When he entered the door, he had a calm expression on his face as if nothing had happened. At least in the eyes of outsiders, there was nothing unusual. However, when he walked into the house and closed the door, the serious expression on his face immediately disappeared. Not only was he full of joy, He even strode to the backyard while laughing and shouting, Lu Chun, Lu Chun, come out quickly. I have great news to tell you. Lu Chun, who was sitting in the courtyard, turned around and looked very calm. He said with a smile, So happy? It seems to be good news. Old Ma nodded repeatedly. When he was about to say something, he suddenly looked around and said with a little surprise, Hey, where's Atsu? He just ate a big piece of meat and went back to sleep. All right, he really is a dog that sleeps better than a pig. Old Ma walked over with a smile and sat opposite Lu Chun. He said, Quick guess, what did I get from looking for Shuang? Lu Chun thought for a while and said thoughtfully, She agreed to give you money? Old Ma snorted and said with a smug look on his face, Isn't that obvious? The question is, how many exactly? Why don't you guess? Quick, quick. Lu Chun also laughed and said about 5,000. After all, if we ask for a sky-high price, Shui will have to pay us back fiercely. Old Ma slapped his thigh and said proudly, Wrong. More than that. Lu Chun smiled with a hint of surprise and said, More than that? Amazing. Old Ma, you can even deal with Shui. Quick, tell me, how much did you give? 10,000. Old Ma said proudly. Amazing, amazing. Lu Chun laughed and said, We're rich. Chapter 404. After nightfall, Old Ma, who had gotten the biggest windfall in his life, finally went back to his room to sleep contentedly. During the period of returning, just now, Old Ma pulled Lu Chun and talked a lot. He showed great longing and yearning for the decadent life that was about to unfold in the immortal city. Old Ma's attitude surprised Lu Chun a little. Although 10,000 spirit stones was indeed a huge sum of money, and most of the poor row cultivators with no family background might not see so much money in their lifetime, Old Ma was someone who had been with a soul formation cultivator for many years. He also had the support of Zhengxianming and Fuyunji, the most powerful hall in Zhengxianming. No matter what, he shouldn't be so excited, right? Usually, when we were in Qingshutang village, you were always calmer. Old Ma snorted at Lu Chun's words and refuted them without hesitation. True Lord Tianlan is naturally one of the top immortals in the world, but I've been with him for a long time. Our identities are too different. I'm just a small spy. What special benefits can I get? Zhengxianming is indeed a towering tree, but few people in Zhengxianming know my identity, okay? What benefits can I get? I have a good relationship with Fuyunji, but recently you've been giving hall leader Shuang a hard time and asked me to go over to ask for money. Cutting off people's income is like killing their parents. Do you know that? She has already chased me out once. Now I'm very worried that I might die mysteriously on the side of the road with no one to collect my corpse. So after saying so much, I'm very miserable. I'm basically a rogue cultivator with no family background. In this situation, it's not strange for me to be excited when I see this huge sum of money, right? Lu Chun thought about it and nodded. Yes, you're right. I didn't think so at first, but after hearing what you said, I suddenly feel that these 10,000 spirit stones are too good. It's worth celebrating. Old Ma laughed out loud, and his excitement was obvious. He patted Lu Chun's shoulder and said, Then tomorrow we will go to spend? No, tomorrow we will go work to work. He quickly corrected his expression and said seriously. Lu Chun said, All right. Old Ma chuckled, then turned around and walked towards his bedroom. However, after taking a few steps, he suddenly turned around to look at Lu Chun and said, Hey, you seem a little strange. Lu Chun's heart skipped a beat, but he smiled and said calmly, What's strange? I'm fine. Old Ma looked him up and down, and a trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. Lu Chun was secretly shocked. He thought to himself, Does this guy really have some hidden skills? How can he detect traces of perfected Lord Tianlan's previous visit? Old Ma observed him for a while and suddenly said, Lu Chun, why don't you look excited at all? Lu Chun was startled and said, Excited? Do I need to be excited? Old Ma said, I remember when you lived with me in Qingshutang village, you often scolded me for a few pieces of spirit stones. Why don't you have any reaction now that we have this huge sum of 10,000 spirit stones? Lu Chun heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, I thought you were going to say something. I was bored in that stupid village, so I was just playing with you. It's just 10,000 spirit stones. I don't care about it. Just. Old Ma paused and looked at him with disdain. He shook his head and said, "Pretentious, you just like to pretend." With a disdainful look on his face, he obviously did not believe Lu Chen's words at all. He then walked back slowly. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh. After watching him return to his room, he looked up at the darkening sky and returned to his own room. There was a candle in the bedroom. Lu Chen lit it and sat down at the table. Atsu was lying on the floor and sleeping soundly. Lu Chen couldn't help but smile when he saw its appearance. He walked over and rubbed its head. Its fur was soft, and it gave off a warm aura. At that moment, his eyes suddenly became a little blank, as if he was looking at an unknown place. Even his voice became a little hollow. In this room, there was only himself and Atu, who was sleeping soundly. After a long time, he could only hear him mumbling softly to himself. From day to night, the words spoken by people are mixed with lies. "Atu, can you tell if I'm telling the truth or not?" His eyes finally fell on a candle flame that was burning silently. The faint yellow light was reflected in his pupils, burning silently. "I've been a shadow since I was a child, and I've been a shadow for too long, Atsu." Atsu was sleeping soundly. Maybe it was dreaming of something delicious because its mouth was making a series of grunting sounds. Lu Chen looked down at it, his eyes calm and gentle, and said softly, "Atsu, I seem to have gotten used to lying. I'm always lying. I'm always pretending to be something else. Sometimes I don't even know what my real face looks like." He slightly lowered his head, and the candlelight fell on the side of his face, making it look dark and uncertain. So, his voice seemed to be a little sad, a little emotional, a little disappointed, and yearning, as if he was thinking of something that happened a long time ago. "If only Xin was still here, right, Atsu? She's so stupid. I don't even need to lie to her, he." He chuckled softly, but at the end, there was a bit of sadness in his voice. He quietly said so. The next morning, when the sun was shining, Old Ma woke up from his dream early. After tidying up, he went out and walked to Lu Chen's bedroom. He knocked on the door and shouted loudly, "Hey, wake up! Wake up! Today's weather is so good. It's a good day to go to do something." After a while, a few grumbling and somewhat annoyed barks came from behind the closed door. Then, a series of footsteps approached from afar. After a creak, Lu Chen opened the door and stood there. He even yawned and said, "What are you doing? The sun just rose, isn't it? It's too early for you to be up." "What do you mean by early?" Old Ma glared at him, showing a deep hatred for Lu Chen's lazy habits. He said seriously, "We have to do something big for the sake of the world, for justice, and for the sake of the world. How can we be lazy? Quickly wash up, change your clothes, and tidy up. We'll go out to do something." Lu Chen was a little surprised. He looked up and down at Old Ma and said, "It's only been one night. Why do you seem to be different from the past 10 years? It's like you've changed into a different person." Old Ma spat and said, "I used to hang out with you in that godforsaken mountain village. I didn't have any motivation at all. But now it's different. We're in Immortal City. This is a great opportunity." Lu Chen interrupted. "The main thing is that you have money, right?" This is when no. The main thing is that you have the opportunity to do something big. Old Ma corrected Lu Chen's wrong point of view in time. Lu Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand and said, Okay, wait for me. I'll be out soon. Hurry up." Old Ma paced back and forth in the yard. After a while, he saw Lu Chen coming out of the room. He poked his head out and glanced at Lu Chen's bedroom. Seeing that Atsu was still lying there with sleepy eyes, he couldn't help but say, "If we go out like this for a day and leave Atsu alone at home, will there be an accident? It'll be fine." Lu Chen walked to the storeroom, opened the door, and brought back a large piece of demon beast meat. He put it next to Atsu, then walked out and said to Old Ma, "It's growing recently, so it can't wait to eat, drink, and sleep every day. It won't want to go out." "Huh? My goodness, it's still growing at this age?" Old Ma exclaimed. "Yes." Lu Chen looked back and said faintly, "I only found out last night. It seems that Atsu is going to advance again." Chapter 405. Advancement? What advancement? Old Ma was obviously startled and asked in astonishment, I've never heard of a dog advancing. Lu Chun thought for a moment and said, that's true. What I said just now wasn't quite right. You can think of Atsu's situation as, it's recently growing again. Old Ma was taken aback and said, My goodness, you mean because it recently ate the meat of these demon beasts, this big dog will continue to grow? Lu Chun smiled and pulled him out. At the same time, he smiled and said, I'm guessing it's probably like this. Old Ma was pulled out by him, and as he walked, he looked back and said, What kind of dog is this? I've never seen a dog that can grow so big. Although the two of them had been bickering and ridiculing each other before, it was probably because they had known each other for a long time, and their friendship was too good, so they were very close. However, after leaving the house, Old Ma quickly adjusted his position and said to Lu Chun, The thing we're going to do, you're in charge. I'm here to help you, and then I'll take care of the money. No matter what you spend in the future, I'll pay for it. Lu Chun nodded, and the two of them walked forward together. After crossing the horse-washing bridge, they walked into the bustling streets of Immortal City. There were all kinds of people coming and going on the streets, but whether it was Lu Chun or Old Ma, they didn't care. But somewhere along the way, Old Ma suddenly pointed to a place and said to Lu Chun with a smile, Look, isn't that the nightclub we went to last time? Lu Chun glanced over there, and sure enough, it was the place they went to that night. But it was daytime, and there were indeed few people there. Even the door was closed. It seemed like it was the same as most other places, closed during the day. You sure remember it well. You've only been there once, but you remember it so well, Lu Chun said. Old Ma waved his hand and said with a smile, There's no such thing. It's just that I happened to see the white tiger statue outside the house from the window one night. The angle and distance were about the same as today, so I recognized it at a glance. In the Immortal City, the statues of the four great holy beasts were so tall and majestic that one could see at least one statue in most places. Generally speaking, these majestic statues of unknown origins have become the center of the various districts in the Immortal City over the years. The closer one was to the statue, the livelier it was. Of course, there were casinos, nightclubs, and other places to squander money. It was even said that there was an unwritten custom that the closer the nightclubs and shops were to the Colossus, the higher the grade. Of course, the amount of money needed to make a trip and would also increase. Lu Chun smiled and shook his head. He patted the shoulder of Old Ma, who was still sighing and looking at the nightclub building, and continued to walk forward. After Old Ma caught up, Lu Chun suddenly said in a low voice, Old Ma, there's something I've always wanted to ask you. Old Ma glanced at him and said, What is it? Say it. This time, it was the damn Baldy who found me and wanted me to help him do something. I decided to help him in the end. Lu Chun walked side by side with him and said softly at the same time, But you're different. I don't think there's a need for you to get involved. Old Ma frowned and said, What do you mean? But this is indeed something I want to do. No one forced me to do it. Lu Chun nodded slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, Didn't the damn Baldy say anything to you? Old Ma said, No, Master was just like usual, telling me what to do and what to do. Lu Chun put his hands behind his back and seemed to be deep in thought. At the same time, he said lightly, Today is different from the past. In the past, you almost never did anything like directly dealing with the lunatics of the evil cult. Why do you have to come and ask for trouble? According to what I said, after you sent me to Immortal City, you can actually retire. Old Ma furrowed his brows and said, Retire? This kind of thing doesn't seem dangerous. But once you go deeper, the sacred tree is the most important and fundamental source of faith in the history of the evil cult. Anyone who wants to destroy it is almost certain to be the mortal enemy of the evil cult. It's extremely dangerous. Lu Chun looked at Old Ma and said in a low voice, Actually, you don't have to work so hard to run with me. Maybe it's better to go back and enjoy the rest of your life. Old Ma hesitated for a moment and suddenly laughed. Then he said, Actually, I've thought about these things before, but Master told me that he hoped I can help you in the end. And I myself actually have the same thought. After all, I have lived with you in that broken mountain village for 10 years. I can't let you be caught by those lunatics so easily. And there are some things that you have to be careful of. Lu Chen didn't seem to understand old Ma's words. After walking a few steps forward, he smiled and said to him, "Be careful of what?" Old Ma laughed and said, "Be careful of the evil cult. Where are we going?" After walking around the white tiger statue with Lu Chen, Old Ma couldn't help but ask Lu Chen, "It seems that the two of us have been walking around this statue for the whole morning." Lu Chen looked indifferent, glanced at him, and said, "You know there's a slang in Jianghu called observing one's words and body language, right? I also want to see if there's a possibility that the people here are madmen from the evil faction who sneaked in." Old Ma didn't believe it and said, "There are people everywhere on the street. You can recognize them with your eyes." "I won't believe it, even if you beat me to death." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm just saying." Old Ma seemed to have walked a little too much. He simply sat down on a carved bench by the side of the road. At the same time, he said to Lu Chen, "I say, we have mentioned before that you are in charge of this matter. Since we have been walking for so long, what are you going to do? The ancients have an old saying, sharpening the knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood." Lu Chen said calmly to Old Ma, "When you were complaining about me along the way, I had already remembered the direction of the nearby streets. In the future, if we are betrayed or hunted down, at least we can escape more smoothly, right?" Old Ma was speechless. After a moment, he muttered, "We haven't even fought, and we already want to escape and be killed. I can't do this job anymore." As he spoke, he moved closer and whispered, "Do you have a clue or not?" Lu Chen didn't look at him. His eyes seemed to be looking at an unknown place. At the same time, he whispered, "I have a list of the most suspicious people in Immortal City over the years. Including the people in Zhengxianmeng." Old Ma was obviously surprised and whispered, "There's such a thing. Then which place, and who are you going to pick later?" Lu Chen said with a smile, "I haven't found them yet. Let's take our time to find them. But," he paused for a moment, then continued, "but I should have an idea of the people we're going to find today. But this is nothing to show off. I have always wanted to ask you, do ordinary people like us have the chance to meet those high and mighty perfected deity transformation?" Old Ma was shocked. When he looked at Lu Chen's face again, there didn't seem to be anything strange. He quickly pulled him to a secluded place and said, "If you want to meet our perfected deity transformation, just say the word." Before he finished speaking, he heard Lu Chen suddenly ask, "What if I want to meet other perfected deity transformation in this immortal city? Is there any way?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but nodded and said, "Yes." Chapter 406. As for the others, they have nothing to do with you, right? This time, Old Ma seemed to be a little more afraid. Not only did he not say their names, but he did not even dare to mention the words soul formation perfected cultivator. Lu Chen said, "Of course not. I was just asking." Old Ma snorted and said, "What a coincidence. I've been with you for more than 10 years. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? You must have something. Tell me, why do you want to meet those people?" Lu Chen did not answer. Instead, he laughed and said, "I didn't expect you to know me so well. Shouldn't I?" Old Ma asked back. Lu Chen said, "Of course. After all, we've lived together in that broken village of Qingshitang for 10 years. But I really didn't expect you to be so meticulous. If we have a falling out in the future, I'm afraid I won't be able to escape as long as you're here." Old Ma's expression changed slightly. Then, he laughed and said, "Then you have to be careful. Don't walk right into the trap." Lu Chen smiled and looked at Old Ma. "Yes, so when it really comes to that, I'll have to find a way to kill you and then run for my life." The smile on Old Ma's face froze. He looked at Lu Chen and could not smile for a moment. The atmosphere between the two of them froze for a moment. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly laughed out loud. He reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder. He said with a smile, "Just a casual sentence and you're scared silly?" Old Ma swallowed his saliva. After a while, he laughed dryly and said, "Nonsense. Brother, don't talk nonsense. I don't know about others, but you, the shadow, I'm really scared." Lu Chun looked at old Ma, and the frivolous look on his face gradually disappeared. As if he had thought of something, he straightened his expression and nodded to old Ma. He said seriously, "Don't worry. I've always treated you as my best brother for so many years." Old Ma stared at him for a moment. Then his expression relaxed, and he smiled. Sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on the huge white tiger statue. The strange tiger eyes seemed to be staring in this direction. "Let's cut the crap. We were supposed to get down to business, but we got sidetracked," old Ma said to Lu Chun. "Let's get down to business first. Who are you going to see today?" "A gardener," Lu Chun replied. "What did a gardener do?" As the name suggested, there were people who took care of flowers and plants. The Immortal City was huge, had a large population, and was known as the most prosperous place in the world. Naturally, there were all kinds of needs, and flowers and plants were one of them. Of course, compared with the nightclub, which was an ancient business that humans instinctively did since ancient times, the gardener's business was still much smaller. Most of the time, there might only be 1 or 2 gardeners in an ordinary city. However, there were still many gardeners in the Immortal City. After all, in addition to helping people plant flowers and plants, there were also many gardeners who directly opened their own shops and sold precious flowers to the public. The flower shop that Lu Chun and Old Ma found was in the White Tiger District. In fact, it wasn't too far from the place where they rested before. It was probably near the territory of the White Tiger statue's tail. Soon, they went around 2 streets and saw the front of the flower shop. Thousand Flowers Hall. Looking at the flower shop across the street from a distance, Old Ma frowned slightly and suddenly said to Lu Chun, "If this shop was opened in Kunwa City, it would have been torn down 30 or 50 times, right?" "Huh? What do you mean?" Lu Chun asked with some surprise. Old Ma said, "This name is obviously disrespectful to the Kunlun party." Lu Chun was a little puzzled. He looked at the Thousand Flowers Hall a few more times, but he still didn't see any clues. He said, "I don't think so. I don't think this name offends the Kunlun party." Old Ma smiled and didn't say anything. He just waved his hand and said proudly, "You go back and think about it carefully. If you really can't think of anything, you can ask me again at night. You're actually keeping me in suspense." Lu Chun glared at Old Ma with some dissatisfaction. Old Ma didn't care and walked towards the flower shop with a smile. He also beckoned to Lu Chun to follow him. Lu Chun curled his lips. It was unknown whether he was cursing or not. He then walked to Old Ma's side. He heard Old Ma say in a low voice, "The person you're looking for is in here." Lu Chun looked ahead and said, "Yes, but I'll say it again. All the people on that list haven't been proved whether they're good or evil. You should be careful later and don't act recklessly. It'll be bad if you wrongly accuse an innocent person." Old Ma casually replied, "It doesn't matter. In any case, we're doing great things, so we don't care about the lives of ordinary people." Lu Chun's footsteps suddenly stopped, but he stood still on the spot. Old Ma immediately stopped and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chun looked at him silently. After a long silence, he said, "What you said just now was not good. Don't say it like that in the future." He seemed to sigh and said in a low voice, "Ordinary people are still people." Old Ma was stunned for a moment. Then he nodded and smiled. "You're right. In fact, I just said it casually. Speaking of which, compared with those real big shots, we are also ordinary people." Hearing his self-mocking tone, Lu Chun also smiled and walked past him. At the same time, he laughed in a low voice and said, "Come on, do you think I don't know you? As long as you safely retire in the future, you will definitely have enough backup plans to live the rest of your life comfortably." Old Ma was shocked and stared at Lu Chun. "Damn it, you actually know me so well." "It seems that before I retire, I have to think of a way to kill you first. Otherwise, there will be endless troubles in the future." Lu Chun laughed. When the two of them walked into the Thousand Flower Hall, they were greeted by clusters of delicate and alluring flowers, and pots of gorgeous flowers were placed in the shop. The red flowers and green leaves were extremely charming, causing one to be unable to take it all in. The air was filled with a dense fragrance of flowers, causing one to be intoxicated by the smell. Lu Chun and Old Ma were actually people with rich experience. However, it was the first time that they suddenly saw so many flowers in one place. This feeling was different from the feeling of planting one or two precious flowers in those courtyards. Vaguely, there was a feeling of a forest of flowers in front of them. It seemed to set off the extraordinariness of the shop owner. However, unlike other shops, this extraordinary boss didn't rush to greet customers as soon as he saw them. Lu Chun and Old Ma waited at the door for a while and admired many pots of beautiful flowers, but no one came to greet them. At this time, both Lu Chun and Old Ma felt that something was wrong. They looked at each other, and Old Ma muttered, "Something seems wrong. I've never seen a person who does business like this." Lu Chen's gaze swept across the Thousand Flowers Hall and looked ahead, but he said, "No, I've seen it before." Old Ma was startled and said in surprise, "What? You've seen it before?" "Yes, I have." Lu Chun seemed to have sensed something and began to walk into the flower shop. At the same time, he continued to say to Old Ma, "For example, there was a shop in Kunwa City called Black Hill Pavilion. The boss there was almost the same as this one. 3 days of fishing, 2 days of drying nets, and 1 day of sleeping." Old Ma said, "You don't make venomous accusations." Just as he was about to argue, Lu Chun suddenly grabbed Old Ma's arm and his expression darkened. Old Ma was startled and his expression also slightly changed. In the depths of this flower shop, the smell of blood began to come from the fragrance of flowers. After turning around a pot of flowers, they saw the owner of the flower shop they were looking for. It was a dead man, nailed to the wall by a long sword. Blood stained the white wall under his body. Chapter 407. The smell of blood in the air mixed with the rich fragrance of the flowers. The bright red blood and the enchanting flowers complemented each other. Near the corpse, one could even see some blood splashing on the petals. Lu Chun and Old Ma looked at each other and saw the surprise and shock in each other's eyes. However, this was certainly not a good time to be in a daze, so after a moment, Old Ma immediately said, "Let's go." With that, he was about to leave the flower shop, but he was pulled back by Lu Chun. He heard Lu Chun say in a low voice, "Don't worry, I'll go take a look." Old Ma hesitated for a moment and looked outside the shop. It was quiet at the entrance, as if the outside world still knew nothing about what happened in Thousand Flowers Hall. He gritted his teeth and slowly nodded. Lu Chun walked over to the corpse that had been nailed to the wall. The corpse was in an extremely wretched state. From the appearance, it should be a man in his 40s or 50s. He was not tall and was slightly fat. There was nothing particularly eye-catching about him. However, when Lu Chun walked to the side of the corpse and gently moved the dead man's head, he saw fear and despair on the face. His gaze lingered on the face for a moment, and then he looked down, scanning the entire body of the dead man, especially his hands. "How is it?" This voice came from Old Ma, who was standing at the back and looking at the door from time to time with his brows furrowed. "Did you find anything?" Lu Chen's gaze swept over the wounds on the dead man's body, especially the fatal wound on his chest. At the same time, it was the sword that nailed his body to the wall. The blade was sharp, the sword was fierce, and the sword pierced through the heart with no intention of leaving the opponent a way out. After a moment of silence, Lu Chun turned his head to look at the blood on the ground and the surrounding flowers. He then stood up and walked back to Old Ma's side. "How is it?" Old Ma asked again. Lu Chun pondered for a moment and said, "This person should be the boss of Thousand Flowers Hall, Huat Danyuo, that we came to look for today." Old Ma frowned and said, "Is there a mistake?" Lu Chun shook his head and said, "There shouldn't be any mistake. This dead man's appearance, figure, and some of the small characteristics on his body all match the information I received." Old Ma wanted to say something, but hesitated. He signaled to Lu Chun and said in a low voice, "No matter what, it's not safe here. Let's go first." Lu Chun turned around to look at the miserably dead boss of the Thousand Flowers Hall, then silently nodded his head. The two of them turned around and walked out. Pots of fresh flowers and green grass blocked the disgusting scene behind them. Even the smell of blood was covered by the fragrance of flowers. When they walked onto the main street again, bright sunlight descended from the sky and sprinkled on their bodies. It suddenly made one feel as if they had been reborn from the ashes, and also as if in that instant they felt as if they had returned from hell to the warm human world. There were naturally pedestrians on the main street, and there were many of them. People came and went, and it was extremely bustling. After all, this place was a gathering of shops, and could be considered a relatively prosperous area in the Immortal City's White Tiger District. However, it seemed like no one noticed Lu Chun and Old Ma. It seemed like no one even gave them a second glance. Old Ma let out a light breath, and then walked forward shoulder to shoulder with Lu Chun. From the outside, the expressions on their faces had recovered in the shortest amount of time possible. At least from the outside, it seemed like they had just casually walked into the most ordinary flower shop and strolled around. After not finding any goods that satisfied them, they continued walking down street. No one could have imagined that at that moment, just now, they had come into close contact with a dead person in a cluster of flowers. Is there something fishy about this? After walking out of this long street, and at the same time making sure that there were no hidden sentries or secret agents following behind them, Old Ma still couldn't wait to ask this question to Lu Chun. Lu Chun's expression also looked somewhat solemn. After hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "It still feels somewhat fishy. I only found out about this person's whereabouts yesterday, and only one night later, I came to find him. How could it be such a coincidence that he suddenly died?" Old Ma wasn't interested in his sigh at all. He was only very concerned about the scene he saw just now. He said in a low voice, "This matter? I mean, the list you got yesterday, who is on it? Also, besides you, who else knows the name on it?" Lu Chun turned back to take a look and saw that the Thousand Flowers Hall was about to disappear from their line of sight at this moment. The dead person just now was indeed the boss of the Thousand Flowers Hall, Hua Duanyuo. No matter what characteristics he had, just now he matched. The only thing he probably didn't expect was that when he saw this person, he was already a dead person. At the same time, Old Ma was frowning beside him, looking at him with a somewhat solemn expression. He said, "These things can you tell me? Also, the person who gave you this list, who is it?" A trace of a complicated expression suddenly flitted across his fat face. He leaned forward slightly and said, "Could it be Lord Supreme himself?" Lu Chun didn't answer, nor did he deny it. He just looked at Old Ma and smiled. Then he walked in front of Old Ma and said in a low voice, "I can't say this matter. That list was of course the one that true Lord Tianlan gave him yesterday. But from the beginning to the end, true Lord Tianlan didn't specifically warn Lu Chun." The perfunctory words he wanted to say at this moment were probably because he had no other choice. "Well, since you won't say, I won't ask." Facing Lu Chun, Old Ma was as casual as an ordinary person, frighteningly straightforward. However, he clearly had no intention of backing down. Instead, he asked Lu Chun in a roundabout way, "If you have something that you can't say, I naturally won't pursue it. However, there's at least one thing that we still have to investigate, right?" Lu Chun frowned and said, "What is it?" Old Ma sneered and said, "Who is the most likely to do it?" Although Old Ma didn't say the specific enemy, but Lu Chun still understood. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I think it's the evil sex killers." Old Ma snorted coldly. A trace of murderous intent appeared in his eyes. But this trace of murderous intent only appeared for a while before it was intercepted by Lu Chun and said, "As far as I know, that family just now could be the evil sex spies lurking here. But the people in Xingxiaming can't be completely sure. I heard that they only moved here recently." Old Ma's eyes turned. Suddenly he used his hand to pull Lu Chun and said in a low voice, "Could it be that the evil sex sent them to test you?" Lu Chun sneered and said, "This really seems like a mad dog." While speaking, he himself shook his head and said, "This matter is hard to say." This matter was not the only one that was hard to say in this world. When Lu Chun and Old Ma went out for the first time and returned to their house empty-handed, they suddenly saw the spirited bald supreme lying on the grass in the yard, and beside him was Atsu, who seemed to have a good impression of this fat bald man. The man and the dog were playing, which turned out to be very interesting. During this time, Supreme Tianlan even shouted to Old Ma and said, "Come and play. I have something to say to you." Old Ma laughed, but there was no smile on Lu Chen's face. His eyes only fell on Atsu. After a while, he said, "Damn Baldy, put Atsu down." Supreme Tianlan smiled and said, "Okay." While speaking, he suddenly stretched out a hand to grab Atsu's neck and directly threw him over. With a gust of wind, the huge dog had already arrived in front of Lu Chen. Chapter 408. When they left Kunlun Mountain a few years ago, Atsu's strength was already very strong after its advancement. Especially after returning from the southern wilderness with Lu Chen, passing through the Great Snow Mountain and meeting Father Sirius, Lu Chen could feel that the strength of this stupid dog had risen day by day. A dog that liked to eat the meat of powerful demonic beasts. How could it possibly be weak? If its physique was slightly weaker, it would be directly burned to death by the essence chi in the meat of the monsters. But now, this Atsu, which could fight with most powerful monsters, seemed to have lost all its strength in the hands of Supreme Tianlan. It could not even control its body. It flew into the air involuntarily, then waved its hands and feet as if it was out of control. It barked wildly and smashed down on Lu Chen. Lu Chen's face changed slightly, and he took half a step back. There was a moment of hesitation on his face, but he gritted his teeth and straightened his body in an instant. He stretched out his hands to catch the huge body of Atsu. Old Ma, who was standing aside, suddenly turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but saw that Atsu was flying at an extraordinary speed. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of him. A gust of wind swept by and actually made Old Ma swallow his words. With a muffled bang, Lu Chen had already caught the huge body of Atsu. At the same time, his face turned pale and then red. He could not stand still and took 3 steps back. Then he suddenly heard a muffled groan. His body shook a few times and finally stopped abruptly. On the ground under his feet, there were 2 more inch-deep footprints on the original green grass in the courtyard, which was particularly dazzling in this courtyard. A black chi lit up and went out in the depths of Lu Chen's pupils. He lowered his head slightly and calmed his panting chest. At this moment, Old Ma stood there with his eyes wide open and seemed to be at a loss. After a moment, it was Supreme Tianlan who suddenly smiled and waved his hand, saying, "Xiao Ma, take this dog to play for a while. I have something to say to Lu Chen." "Yes." Old Ma hurriedly agreed and then walked to Lu Chen's side. He first reached out to touch the black dog, who had stood on the ground again but was obviously still in shock. At the same time, his eyes glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen also looked at him. Their eyes met in midair for a moment. There seemed to be complicated and indescribable emotions in Old Ma's eyes. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then nodded in an imperceptible manner. Old Ma seemed to be relieved and quickly hugged Atsu. Then he laughed and said, "Come with me, Atsu. Today, I will pick a piece of meat for you that is bigger than before." As he spoke, he took Atsu and walked forward. Atsu seemed to care about that piece of demonic beast meat, but after taking 2 steps, it stopped and looked back at Lu Chen with a trace of doubt in its eyes. Lu Chen nodded at it, and then made a gesture with his hand. Only then did Atsu seem to be relieved and followed Old Ma. Lu Chen walked to the front of perfected Lord Tianlan and then sat down. After that, he remained quiet and silent. His reaction was different from that of most people. At this time, ordinary people would at least ask perfected Lord Tianlan a few questions, such as, "What do you want to do here?" or "Why are you here?" But Lu Chen did not say a word. He did not speak, but perfected Lord Tianlan finally spoke first. It seemed that this powerful, perfected Lord Tianlan, who could even be ranked in the top 5 in the world, really looked at Lu Chen in a different light. Not only was he not angry at his somewhat cold attitude, but he also had a gentle and kind expression on his face. This dog is not bad, mainly because of its pure bloodline. If there is a little more opportunity in the future, it may be able to go further. As he spoke, he smiled and asked Lu Chen, "Where did you catch this black dog from?" Lu Chen looked up at perfected Lord Tianlan's tall and burly body, feeling as if he was a child in front of this person. However, his tone did not reveal any such thoughts, and he only replied calmly, the land of chaos. It was true that the land of chaos was extremely dangerous, but the land of chaos was vast and filled with all kinds of dangers. Since ancient times, there had not been a single clan or sect that had the ambition and boldness to secretly plot and control the entire land of chaos. Therefore, most of the time, as long as one could survive in the land of chaos, it was common for them to brag to the people around them after they escaped. However, it seemed that perfected Lord Tianlan did not intend to pursue this matter further. It was as if he had just casually found an excuse to speak to Lu Chun. At this moment, he was sitting in front of Lu Chun, his eyes deep and bright. He said indifferently, "I have thought about it for a long time, and I feel that there is a need for us to truly have an open conversation. I want you to be my disciple, to become my successor. I have said this before, but today, when we are alone here, I want to say this to you formally." Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm, as if he was already familiar with these words. On the other hand, Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, and his expression became somewhat complicated. Perfected Lord Tianlan then said, "I've thought about it carefully after I went back. I feel that I do owe you a little in the past, especially when I took you in as my successor. I didn't do a good job." Hearing this, Lu Chen's expression became even more complicated. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not seem to care about his expression at all, and only continued to speak. "Therefore, I came here today to clarify this matter with you. You are my most favorite and most trusted disciple and successor. Although it has not been announced to the public due to various reasons, this thought has existed in my heart for many years and has never changed." Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, but very quickly, he suddenly changed the topic and his voice changed from gentle to somewhat cold. Lu Chun was very familiar with this perfected lord of the divine transformation realm. After all, he was raised by perfected Lord Tianlan since he was young. However, what he heard next still made him subconsciously shocked. "I have no children, so in the future, almost everything I have will be handed over to you." Lu Chen's mind raced, and he almost blurted out the question of how is he doing now from perfected Lord Tianlan. Fortunately, he managed to restrain himself. Perfected Lord Tianlan said slowly, "I think you should also understand that if you want to become my successor, there will be more than just killing and fighting. There are a large number of people under me. If you use them well, you will naturally become a superior person. If you don't..." At this point, he suddenly stopped talking. Lu Chun raised his head and looked at him. After a while, he heard perfected Lord Tianlan say, "I don't know how many foundations and connections I have. If you can't convince them, they won't lower their heads to you. Do you understand?" "Yes," Lu Chun replied. "All right, since you plan to take over my position in the future, I have something to ask your opinion on and see how you plan to deal with it." "Go ahead," Lu Chun said. Actually, there are still many factions and sects that refuse to submit to Zheng Xiaming. Encountering such people often means an extremely fierce fight. However, according to the information from the spies this time, there are 5 extremely powerful devils who have been going against Zheng Xiaming for a long time. Recently, they took the initiative to come to us and want to accept the imperial edict. Lu Chun frowned and said, "That doesn't sound bad." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "It does sound good, but then things got out of hand. Among the 5 devils, 3 of them don't want to live in the martial world anymore and want to retire, but the remaining 2 are still ambitious and want to make a career. If it were you, what would you do?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chun and asked. Chapter 409. Can you explain it more clearly? Lu Chun thought for a moment and asked again. "Okay." Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be very straightforward and said, "The reason for the whole thing is like this. Our Zheng Xiaming has been developing for 1,000 years and is now the strongest sect alliance in the vast cultivation world of the Divine Continent. There's no need to hide this, and there's no need to be polite. However, the world is big and there are many heroes. You can say that our Zheng Xiaming can cover the sky with one hand, but outside of Zheng Xiaming, there are actually many sects and powerful cultivators that are not weak. And the Bloodwing sect is such a sect. The Bloodwing sect is a cultivation sect, but there are actually only 5 people in the sect. They are called the Bloodwing 5 Devils. They don't take in disciples and travel the world in groups. These 5 people have a surname Zhang, Zhu, Zhou, Rui, and Li. Their talents and cultivation are all considered good, and they have made extraordinary achievements in the past few years and made a name for themselves. Bloodwing 5 Devils? Lu Chan thought for a moment and then nodded slowly and said, I've heard of these 5 people before. I heard that they have always been in the East Sea. Although their names also have the word devil in them, they had conflicts with the devil cult in the past and fought a few times. They have a very high reputation among the people. Because the 5 of them have high cultivation, they give the devil cult a headache. That's about it, perfected Lord Tianlan said. Lu Chen looked at him and frowned. If that's the case, aren't these 5 people fine? Why would they? Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly. Because our Zhengxiaming's forces have expanded to the East Sea. He smiled and said to Lu Chen with a very amiable expression, Under our Zhengxiaming, we don't allow such stubborn cultivators to exist. Lu Chen, all right. Perfected Lord Tianlan continued. Actually, these 5 people have had some achievements in their careers in the past. They are proud and arrogant, and because of their high cultivation and reputation, they don't think much of our Zhengxiaming. So, at first we sent people to take them in, but they refused. Left with no choice, we could only deal with them. You see, they are no match for us. Nonsense. Lu Chun rolled his eyes at this damn baldy and snappily said, Those 5 guys are at most Yuanying stage. Your Immortal Alliance has a lot of Yuanying stage cultivators and 6 soul formation perfected monarchs who stand at the peak of the cultivation world. Who the hell can beat you guys? Perfected Lord Tianlan was not angry at Lu Chen's sudden outburst of vulgarities. Instead, the smile on his face deepened. He said with a smile, Well, although what you said is not pleasant to hear, it is the truth. At that time, the old man Tai who was in charge of the overall situation in the East Sea. I heard that under his command, the bloody-winged 5 devils suffered a lot, so they quieted down not long after. Tai Hu, Lu Chun suddenly thought of something. He frowned and said, Is it that perfected Lord Tai Hu from the Heavenly Law Hall? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, That's him. Under the suppression of our Zhengxiaming, the bloody-winged 5 devils are now beaten to the point that they can't fight back and are at their wits' end. However, recently, I suddenly received a secret letter from the Zhang and Rui devils. In the letter, the 2 of them expressed their intentions. They only said that they have never intended to be enemies with Zhengxiaming, and that the enmity over the years is just a misunderstanding. They also said that they have not given up on their ambitions and still intend to serve Zhengxiaming. Lu Chan raised his eyebrows and said, They want to rely on us? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, Exactly. As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. There are still many smart people in this world. However, the troublesome thing is that the old man Tai who is strict and old-fashioned. After being in charge of the Heavenly Law Hall for many years, he has a bad temper and will not easily change his mind. Back then, the bloody-winged 5 devils did not give him any face. Therefore, even if the 5 devils have expressed their intention to surrender and negotiate peace, when it comes to him, they still end up being chased by Zhengxiaming and beaten half to death every day. No wonder they came to look for you. In this cultivation world, as long as Zhengxiaming want to suppress them, it will really be hard for them to continue living in this world. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, You only mentioned Zhang and Rui. What about the other 3 devils? This is the fun part. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, Many years ago, the bloody-winged 5 devils became sworn brothers with different surnames. They are said to be as close as brothers. They are determined to unite and rule the world and make great achievements. However, at this critical moment, the 5 of them originally agreed to retire and hide from the world when they saw that the overall situation was already out of control. Unexpectedly, the 2 of them came to look for me in secret. They said that they yearned for greater achievements, and that their ambition for fame and glory had not given up. They were willing to serve me and beg me to take them in. Lu Chun sighed and said, "Do the other 3 devils know about this?" "They probably don't know yet. That's about it." Perfected Lord Tianlan flung his wide sleeves and said indifferently, "Help me plan how we should deal with this matter." Lu Chun closed his eyes slightly and placed one hand on his thigh. His fingers moved slightly. After a while, he opened his eyes and said to Perfected Lord Tianlan with a calm expression, "In my opinion, there are 2 important points in this matter." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "Speak." Lu Chun said, "Firstly, Perfected Lord Tiehu is the person who is in charge of this matter on behalf of Zhengxiaming, after all. If we act rashly, will we anger him and face the retaliation of the other forces in the Immortal Alliance?" Perfected Lord Tianlan remained silent and only looked at Lu Chun. Lu Chun continued, "Secondly, the bloody-winged 5 devils have made great achievements in the past and have a high reputation among the people. If the Immortal Alliance oppresses them too much, there will be a lot of criticism." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said so. Lu Chun was silent for a while and said, "In my opinion, this matter should be done in 2 steps. Firstly, you only find someone to secretly spread Zhang and Rui's secret letter. Then, the other 3 devils will know that they have betrayed their brothers, and there will be enmity between them. The brotherhood will never be complete, and the name of the bloody-winged 5 devils will naturally come to an end. The people in the world may think that we, Zhengxiaming, are suppressing them, but at the same time, many people will definitely think that the 5 of them are fighting among themselves. At that time, there will be guesses, criticisms, insults, and disappointment. Everyone will be covered in dirty water and stink together. There will be no need to blame each other." Perfected Lord Tianlan pondered for a while and said with a smile, "This is a good plan, but it's a little sinister." Lu Chun sneered and said, "Thanks to you sending me to the devil cult when I was young, I learned these sinister skills and came back." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and said, very good. Come on, continue." Lu Chun said again, "Since the brotherhood of the 5 devils is broken, they will lose the people's trust. Since the 5 brothers are split up, they can naturally be manipulated at will. If you see that they are still useful, you can step forward bravely at this time and announce to the world that the 2 devils Zhang and Rui have renounced darkness for light and are willing to die for the righteous path and righteousness of the common people in the world. You cherish talent and are willing to bear the crime of tarnishing your reputation. You should run around and call for them to be your subordinates. It will be a good show, like a hero rescuing a beauty, and your reputation in the cultivation world will soar." Perfected Lord Tianlan clapped and laughed. Great plan. However, people will probably see that they will bear the crime of being tarnished while we only benefit from it, right?" Lu Chun sneered and said, "There are so many people in the world. Even in the world of cultivation, there are still many idiots. Since you saved those people, there will naturally be people praising you as a great philanthropist. As for the other smart people who can see the truth, half of them will not ask for a rebuff, and the other half will probably feel that it doesn't matter." Moreover, Lu Chun paused for a moment, and his expression seemed to be a little emotional. He clicked his tongue and sighed twice, then said indifferently, "With your status, power, and reputation, even if some ants talk about you, how could you possibly care? Therefore, even though this plan is sinister and a little shameless, as long as you have a reputation and strength, you can naturally do whatever you want without any scruples. What do you think?" Lu Chun asked Perfected Lord Tianlan instead. Perfected Lord Tianlan retracted his smile and looked at Lu Chun. A moment later, he said with a serious expression, "Indeed, I was right about you. You're born to be my successor." Chapter 410. He's gone. When Old Ma walked into the yard with Black Dog, he first looked around and then asked Lu Chun, "Yes, he's gone. Lu Chen nodded and answered absent-mindedly. Old Ma looked at him strangely and asked, "What did perfected immortals say?" Lu Chen didn't answer him. He looked at an unknown place in the yard, his eyes drifting. He seemed to be thinking about something and didn't hear Old Ma's question. Old Ma frowned and raised his voice to call Lu Chen. Lu Chen's body shook and he seemed to wake up. He said in surprise, "Ah, what's wrong?" Old Ma snorted and looked Lu Chen up and down. "It's rare to see you so distracted. Did you say something important to the immortal lord just now?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chen from head to toe. Lu Chen shook his head and said no. "Maybe I've been thinking too much these days and let my mind wander. I'd better go back to sleep later." Old Ma looked at Lu Chen suspiciously, as if he didn't believe Lu Chen's excuse. However, perfected Tianlan's identity and status were not trivial. Even if he and Lu Chen were best friends, if Lu Chen didn't tell him personally, Old Ma didn't have the guts to get to the bottom of it. "All right." Old Ma quickly changed the topic and said, "Since Immortal happened to come over, did you tell him about our visit to Qianhua Hall not long ago?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, I did. At the same time, I also asked him if we were the only ones who knew the names on the list, or if someone else had seen it." Old Ma suddenly became spirited and said, "That's right. How did Immortal answer?" Lu Chen frowned and said after a moment of hesitation, "Damn Baldy said it's a bit troublesome. He's in a high position and has a lot of work to do every day. It's impossible for him to investigate those suspicious people himself, so the list he gave me wasn't actually made by him. Most of the details and the confirmation of the candidates were submitted by his subordinates." Old Ma took a step forward and clenched his right fist. He looked a little nervous and lowered his voice, saying, "Who passed the list?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "There definitely weren't many people who passed through it, but there wasn't just one either. However, Floating Clouds Agency's Shuang is definitely one of the people who have seen this list. The reason for that is because she was the one who personally delivered this list to true monarch Tianlan." Shuang. Old Ma suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air, and his expression turned ugly. However, Lu Chen comforted him and said, "You don't have to be nervous and afraid. Shuang has always been loyal to Dan Baldy. She shouldn't want to harm us." Dan Baldy also said that he will carefully investigate in Fuyunji to see if there's anything fishy. But the situation is turbulent now. He still hopes that I can help him and try to find the lair of the evil cult in Immortal City. Old Ma nodded and said, "I understand. Anyway, no matter what Immortal says, we still do what we plan to do." Lu Chen said, "That's more or less what I mean." Old Ma sighed and said, "It's a pity that this Immortal City is so huge, and the cultivators are as numerous as the carps in the river. It's not easy to find those evil people from the evil cult who are hiding in the dark." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't we still have that list? Although one died at the beginning and we don't know what happened, we still have to do what we should do. However, we still have to do what we have to do. Let's continue to look for the other people on the list. If the next person is fine, then our previous encounter is probably a coincidence. However, if the next person is also in trouble, then we can be sure that there must be a mole in the Floating Clouds division. There must be some kind of secret method that is secretly communicating with the devil cult." Old Ma secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and looked at Lu Chen's relaxed expression. Although he forced a smile on his face, his whole face was dark, and he looked really nervous. After chatting for a while in the courtyard, the sun was going to the west, and it was almost dusk. Lu Chen called Atsu, who was lying at the side and looked a little sleepy after eating, and walked back to the west room with him. Old Ma watched them leave with a complicated expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking at the moment. After returning to his own bedroom, Lu Chen had just turned around and closed the door when he heard a soft murmur beside him. Atsu directly fell to the ground. Then his stomach bulged and he fell asleep. Sleep after eating and eat again after waking up. "How are you like a dog?" "You're completely like a pig," Lu Chen complained in Atsu's ear. Atsu seemed to be used to such words, or maybe he didn't want to disturb his sleep and ignored the guy beside him. He closed his eyes and curled up into a ball and slept. Not long after, Lu Chen heard snoring coming from Atsu's side. "Alas, I can't count on you." Lu Chen shook his head and then found a stool to sit down. He reached into his bosom and fumbled for a while. After a while, he took out the name list given to him by Supreme Tianlan. There were many names written on it, and it was also the matter that he and Old Ma entrusted him to see if there was any way to solve. Lu Chun silently looked at the name list in his hand and glanced over the names on it. In the second row, he saw the name of Hua Duanyuo, the boss of Qianhua Hall. He glanced over the name and paused for a moment. Then, without saying a word, he slowly picked up a pen from the desk and drew a line on the name Hua Duanyuo. The handwriting of Hua Duanyuo became blurred, but the other names were still clear. Lu Chun muttered to himself as he looked at the names in his hand. After thinking for a long time, he went out to the yard in the dead of night. He didn't mind the dirt and directly lay down on the grass in the yard, then looked up at the stars in the sky. The faint starlight seemed to have been like this since ancient times, and it had never changed for millions of years. It illuminated the path of lonely travelers every dark night, watching everyone in the world from birth to adulthood, from leaving home to returning home, from youth to white-haired, and finally to returning to the yellow earth. The starlight sprinkled on Lu Chun like a gentle hand caressing his face. Lu Chun took a deep breath of the night air and felt the breeze from afar. Then he suddenly took out the name list from his bosom. Under the starlight, he gently drew a line under another name, Rui Xiaodian. Chapter 411. Tianlong Mountain stood majestically on the Four Rivers Plain, towering and majestic, overlooking the entire, huge, immortal city. At the same time, it was full of spiritual qi and was a first-class paradise. After being occupied by Zhengxianming, it had been carefully managed for many years. Now, it was already full of well-equipped pavilions, and it was also the well-known location of the headquarters of Zhengxianming. With the current status of the true immortal alliance in the cultivation world, the headquarters of the Celestial Dragon Mountain was naturally decorated with all kinds of dazzling gold and jade. It was hard to know the exact number of people of the true immortal alliance stationed here, but there were at least more than 50,000 people just to maintain the order of the entire huge immortal city. It should be known that the immortal city was the largest city in the world, and the population of the city was said to be over 100 million a long time ago. Therefore, the strength of Zhengxianming could be seen from this aspect. In the Immortal Alliance, just as Lu Chun and Supreme Tianlan said that day, there were many Yuanying perfected persons in Zhengxianming. Of course, this was a bit exaggerated, but it was true that there were many of them. Above the many powerhouses, the ones who really made Zhengxianming stand at the peak of the human cultivation world were, of course, the 6 perfected deities of divine transformation. In addition to Supreme Tianlan, there were also Zhengxianming's immortal Tiehu, who was in charge of the Heavenly Law Hall, Supreme Guangbua, who was in charge of the Grand Chancellor, and the other 3 perfected deities who rarely appeared. They were Lu Yin, Gu Yu, and Jin Long. Needless to say, these 6 perfected deities were naturally big shots who stood at the peak of the human race. They had always been respected by the people, and their status in the immortal city in Zhengxianming was close to that of gods. In fact, under most circumstances, these perfected deities rarely met each other. Firstly, everyone had a lot of work to do, and secondly, to put it bluntly, it was probably the so-called kings don't meet kings. Zhengxianming was such a huge force, and the benefits it brought were even more immeasurable. Behind each perfected deity was not a lone force. First of all, they all had a strong cultivation sect as their backing, and secondly, they had a lot of people under them. After a long time, the true Immortal Alliance was divided into many factions. The largest faction was naturally led by these 6 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs. However, there were still quite a number of factions of various sizes below them. Usually, they schemed against each other in peace and tranquility. They fought openly and secretly. It could be considered a scene that everyone in the true Immortal Alliance was familiar with. True Lord Tai, who was a highly respected deity stage True Lord, He had been famous for many years. His cultivation was profound, plus the heavenly law hall that was in charge of the laws and punishments of the true immortal alliance. They were strict and fair. They did not show favoritism. So his reputation spread far and wide. His reputation was extremely high in the cultivation world. Moreover, the heavenly law hall, which presided over the laws and punishments of Zhengxiameng, was strict and fair, and had continuously punished several disciples. Therefore, in the famous heavenly law hall on Sky Dragon Mountain, everyone was as quiet as a cicada in winter, and did not even dare to breathe loudly, for fear of accidentally angering perfected Tiehu. Therefore, in the famous heavenly law hall on the Sky Dragon Mountain, everyone kept quiet out of fear for the past few days. They did not even dare to breathe loudly, for fear that they would accidentally anger the Iron Pot Supreme, who was not in a good mood. However, there was still one person in this world who could walk into the heavenly law hall in such a tense and dangerous time, and even had the ability to calm down a perfected deity Tiehu in a rage. It was a woman. The huge heavenly law hall was empty at the moment, but the solemn atmosphere was still everywhere. In the huge hall on both sides, there were several rows of wide bookshelves that were more than 10 feet high, filled with all kinds of ancient books, scrolls, and documents, especially the many laws and regulations that Zhengxiameng had decreed for thousands of years. Almost all the original ancient scrolls were preserved here. A huge iron sword was stuck upside down on the ground, piercing into a large bamboo slip with its pages open. This was the most famous sculpture in the Hall of Heavenly Law, and it also symbolized the justice and righteousness that the true immortal alliance had advocated for thousands of years. And on the high platform in front of the iron sword, there was a wide throne overlooking the entire heavenly law hall, as if emitting a supreme aura. Today, there was only one person who could sit on this throne in the heavenly law hall. This person, of course, was perfected Tiehu. Today, he was already a white-haired old man, but his earth-shattering magical power and cultivation made him hale and hardy. His eyes often flashed with a strange light, like thunder and lightning, making people fearful. He sat on the throne on the high platform. His body looked a little thin, and the wide throne didn't quite match his body. However, his aura seemed to have expanded and surged through the entire palace. It was as if he was the real emperor here, and no one could sit on the same level as him. At this moment, in the heavenly law hall, everyone except him had already left. Those people were all driven away by the unhappy perfected Tiehu. He wanted to be alone. He sat alone in this hall for a long time, his eyes slightly closed, as if he was deep in thought, until a series of light footsteps suddenly came from outside, and then came nearer and nearer to the throne on the high platform. Without perfected Tiehu's order in the heavenly law hall, even perfected Yuanying, no one dared to rashly enter this place. But that person obviously did not report, and just casually walked in, and the guards outside the hall seemed as if they did not see this person at all. Taihu True Lord sat on his throne motionlessly. Unexpectedly, he did not show any anger or surprise towards this uninvited guest. He only listened to the footsteps approaching slowly. Even when most people stopped in front of the steps of the high platform, the footsteps did not stop and slowly walked up. Such audacity, such unscrupulousness. But for some reason, perfected Tiehu, who was originally in a bad mood, did not get angry. He slowly opened his pair of lightning-like eyes, looked ahead, and at the same time said indifferently, "You are here?" "Yes, it is me, foster father." A gentle and slightly smiling voice came from the stairs. A moment later, a young and beautiful figure appeared on this high platform. This was an extremely beautiful and at the same time very young lady. Very few people knew her background, but on Sky Dragon Mountain many people knew her. Even if they had not seen her before, they had heard of her name. Her name was Song Wenji, 22 years old, a foster daughter adopted by perfected Tiehu a few years ago. She was the only adopted daughter that Taihu Zhenjuan, who did not have any children, had in his entire life. She was also the only person who could get close to this powerful figure when Taihu Zhenjuan was angry. Everyone on Sky Dragon Mountain knew perfected Tiehu loved this foster daughter very much, treating her like his own daughter. And only she could comfort perfected Tiehu a little when he was unhappy. I heard that you're not in a good mood these few days, so I came to see you. That gentle and sweet voice faintly carried a strand of soul-stealing. Walked to the front of perfected Tiehu's throne. With a trace of a smile on her face, she did not avoid anything beside perfected Tiehu, directly sat on the incomparably majestic throne. Her white and tender hands gently held perfected Tiehu's rough and wrinkled arm, smiled and hugged it in her bosom, gently shook it a few times, smiled and said, "Foster father, anger is harmful to the body. Please don't be angry." Perfected Tiehu looked at her. His gaze slowly softened. His eyes also had a little more pampering. After a moment, he stretched out his hand, hugged Song Wenji in his bosom, gently stroked her a few times, snorted and said, "It is good that you are here. Naturally, I will not be angry. But that old Tianlan is really hateful. He came to spoil my plans again." Chapter 412. Perfected Tianlan. Song Wenji looked surprised, and a strange expression flashed across her charming face. Obviously, no one could remain calm after hearing the name of perfected deity of Huashan realm. Immortal Tiehu was not surprised at all. He was a perfected deity of Huashan realm, and he was used to similar situations over the years. He snorted coldly and said, "It's that person. A few days ago, I was working in Donghai. Everything was going well. There were a few local troublemakers who were dissatisfied, but they were quickly suppressed by me. It seemed that everything would be completed after a period of time, but at this time, he came out and intervened." Song Wenji's bright and clear eyes turned, and she said softly, "Does he want to be enemies with you, foster father? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. You are all perfected deity of Zhengxianming, and you often see each other. You won't fall out because of such a small matter." Immortal Tiehu smacked his lips, looking a little annoyed and helpless. He said, "Of course I won't fall out with you. To be honest, Tianlan didn't really go against me, but he still did something that disgusted me." "What's so serious that it made you so angry?" Song Wenji asked in surprise. Her charming face was slightly red, and she looked like a beautiful flower in full bloom. Immortal Tiehu glanced at her, and his expression softened a lot. He chuckled, put his right hand around Song Wenji's waist, and let her sit on his lap. At the same time, he held her soft white hand and gently stroked it. Then he said grumpily, "There is a school called Bloodwing Sect in Donghai. There are 5 devils in the sect who have always been against us. Of course, I couldn't be polite to them, so I used the power of thunder and made them flee in panic. However, when I was about to completely subdue them, Tianlan suddenly jumped out and told me that 2 of the Bloody Wing 5 devils wanted to seek refuge with us and took out their handwritten letters to announce to the world. In the end, he also expressed that he cherished talents and was willing to be their guarantor, as long as they were willing to work for Zhengxianming and make meritorious deeds to atone for their crimes." When Song Wenji heard this, her expression immediately changed. She frowned and said, "Isn't this jumping out to steal the credit? What about the hard work that foster father has done before?" True Lord Tiehu nodded his head, his face revealing an expression that said, "Exactly so." He said angrily, "Exactly so, that's why I'm angry. But it's not a good thing to do. If I flatly refuse, I'll have a reputation of being intolerant and close to falling out with Tianlan. But if I accept it just like that, I'll feel that I've suffered a grievance in silence. It's too disgusting." Song Wenji sighed, her face showing some distress. She used her palm to gently rub True Lord Tiehu's chest a few times. At the same time, she appeared to be in deep thought. After a while, she said to True Lord Tiehu tentatively, "Foster father, no matter what, you and True Lord Tianlan are both bigwigs in Zhengxianming. Don't tell me that all these years, you and the other divine transformation realm supremes have never made any agreements or promises, such as not meddling in other people's affairs." True Lord Tiehu said, "Of course there are such rules, and they are written rules. So, you see, The 6 supremes and the immortal allies are all in charge of their own duties, and none of them will interfere with each other. My Tianlai Hall and Tianlan's Fiyunji will never have any interaction. But these are all things that are clear on the surface. It's different from this time. He suddenly spoke and interfered in the affairs of the Bloody Wing 5 devils. Anyway, he has the reputation of cherishing talents, so I really can't do anything to him. Song Wenji sighed, looking a little annoyed and worried. She said, "Hey, what should we do?" Really, perfected Lord Tianlan is a person of such high status after all. Why is he still so unreliable in handling matters? Hearing her words, true Lord Tiehu seemed to be in a much better mood. Instead, he laughed and comforted this beautiful little girl. He said with a smile, all right, it's just a small matter. Although the Bloody Wing 5 devils are famous outside, in my opinion, they're only slightly stronger than ordinary people. It's not worth worrying about. What I'm angry about is the tacit agreement between us Supremes, but Tianlan suddenly broke it and attacked us. What does this mean? As he spoke, true Lord Tiehu seemed to be angry again. He complained to Song Wenji. What do you think this is? He stood up and shouted to the world that the Bloody Wing 5 devils are a pity and that they are loyal to the right path. But what about the things I did before? Didn't I, Tiehu, become a bad person who suppressed talents and excluded dissidents? His eyes are like torches, and Bolu has his eyes on a horse of 1,000 li. Doesn't this make me seem stubborn and stupid? Song Wenji couldn't help but burst into laughter. She said in a spoiled manner in true Lord Tiehu's arms, "Father, how can you say that about yourself?" Hearing her coquettish grumble, Immortal Tiehu shook his head with a smile. He sighed and said, "Well, it's really not a big deal. It's just that Tianlan is a little insidious. But I have said a lot of harsh words to Fiyunji a few days ago. Could it be that this old man is dissatisfied and deliberately picked a fight with me this time?" Speaking of this, true Lord Tiehu's brows slowly frowned. There was a hint of thought in his eyes. It seemed that he really began to think about this possibility. Song Wenji glanced at him, and a glimmer of light flashed deep in her eyes. Then she held true Lord Tiehu's arm and shook it gently. She said with a smile, "Forget it, father. Don't think about this kind of trouble. If you're really angry, why don't you think of a way to disgust him in other ways?" True Lord Tiehu's thoughts were interrupted by her, but he didn't care. His eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, "Well, what you said is somewhat reasonable. This time, I don't want to argue about the matter of the Bloody Wing sect. After all, there is such a Zengxiaming here. Everyone has to make a living. If we fall out because of this small matter, we may become the public enemy of the immortal allies. It's not worth it. So, if you want to get back at him," he thought for a moment and said, "Among the subordinates of Tianlan, the one with the most problems must be Fiyunji. If I can really find a loophole, I will definitely let him know the rules and regulations of Tianlu Hall." Song Wenji said with a smile, "Is there anything I can help you with?" True Monarch Tai, who laughed out loud. He used his hand to lightly pinch Song Wenji's delicate face and said, "There's no need for that. There are a bunch of trivial matters at the Fuyin Company, but the water inside is still very deep. You should not get involved. But there's another thing that you may be able to help me with." Song Wenji straightened up and said, "What is it?" "Father, just tell me. I will definitely help you." True Lord Tiehu took out a piece of white paper from his bosom and handed it to Song Wenji. He said lightly, "This is a list I just received. It is said that Tianlan is secretly sending people to investigate the people above, but I don't know what his purpose is. If you have time, help me keep an eye on it." Song Wenji was stunned for a moment. Her face showed a trace of a strange expression. She reached out and slowly took the white paper. At the same time, she looked at Tiehu and said, "This thing should be the secret of Fiyunji. How could you?" True Lord Tiehu stretched himself and looked calm. He smiled and said, "You see, there are always some people with lofty ideals. Although they are in the enemy camp, their hearts are with Tianlu Hall." Song Wenji covered her mouth and smiled. She nodded and agreed. At the same time, her eyes flickered and swept over the white paper in her hand. Chapter 413. If we don't have the reputation of killing Baldy, if we are just ordinary people with no background or backing, then is there any way for me to meet those high and mighty deity stage cultivators in Zhengxianming? When they went out that morning, Lu Chun very casually asked Old Ma like a joke. Old Ma looked a little surprised, glanced at him, then frowned and pondered for a moment. In the end, he still shook his head and said, "If it is really like what you said, the difference in status is too big. In my opinion, you can't meet them." Lu Chen walked with him to the horse-washing bridge, looking at the river flowing under the bridge, sighed at the same time, and said, "So the gap between people is so big." "Nonsense." Old Ma snorted at Lu Chen's sigh, said with a disdainful expression, "You have been in the devil's sect for 10 years, and then you were forced to hide for more than 10 years. I don't believe you don't understand this kind of common sense. Don't pretend to be a young man who doesn't know anything." "Huh." Lu Chen laughed, reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder, said with a smile, "You are good at everything, but sometimes your mouth is too poisonous. Don't say I didn't advise you. I don't care when you talk to me, but when you meet those big shots. When I meet people like Lord Zhengxianming, I'm always honest, groveling and respectfully hugging their thighs." Old Ma said. Lu Chen paused, looked at Old Ma, and said with a smile, "You are really an honest person. Thank you. Get lost." The two continued to walk forward, and after walking for a while, Old Ma suddenly broke the silence, said to Lu Chen, "In fact, that mattered just now. It can't be said that there is no way." Lu Chen's footsteps slightly paused, as if a little surprised, said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma also looked at him, but did not answer immediately, just stared at him for a moment, said, "If you and I are unknown civilians, naturally we are not qualified to go to heaven to listen. So, the first thing we need to do is, of course, to become famous. Maybe we can win a good reputation, or maybe we will have a bad reputation. In short, we have to be famous to the ears of those big shots. Then we will naturally have a chance, right?" Lu Chen shrugged, said, "These days, to be famous, especially to be famous to the attention of a deity lord, is not an easy thing." "That's right." Old Ma patted him on the shoulder with a faint smile on his face. "So you should behave yourself and not cause any more trouble." Lu Chen did not ask what Old Ma meant by "don't cause more trouble," and Old Ma did not ask what Lu Chen meant by asking those deity lord, intentionally or unintentionally. They just talked about this topic, and then the two did not mention it again. "What is the name of the person we are looking for today?" Old Ma asked Lu Chen. "Rui Xiaodian." "What does he do?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, "I think he is a butcher." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then nodded without saying anything. No matter who heard the name Rui Xiaodian for the first time, the first reaction in their mind would probably be that perhaps this was a cheerful and lively young man, standing on a certain street in Immortal City on a sunny day, turning around with a handsome smile under the light shining from the sky. The truth seemed to be more or less the same. Rui Xiaodian was a butcher, but at the same time, he was also a handsome and young butcher. He had his own small butcher shop in the neighborhood of White Tiger District. Unlike the bloody and slightly dirty butcher shops that people imagined, Rui Xiaodian's butcher shop had always been very clean and tidy. Every day, he would put a fixed amount of meat on the counter of the butcher shop facing the street, clearly mark the price, and never cheated the old or the young. Every day, he would call it day. Although the people in the neighborhood were willing to buy meat from him because the meat in his shop was clean and fresh, he never increased the daily quantity. Of course, most of the people who came to buy meat were women from the nearby streets. It was rare to see a young and good-looking butcher like Rui Xiaodian. It was said that men were lustful and liked beautiful women, but when they met a young man who was equally good-looking, those women in their 20s and 30s were not shy at all and would often squeeze into his shop. Every time they bought meat, they would tease and joke around, but Rui Xiaodian would just smile and not care. As time went by, the butcher shop's business became the best in the neighborhood. With more people coming to buy the meat naturally sold faster. On this day, all the meat was sold out in less than 2 hours after the stall was opened. As usual, Rui Xiaodian politely and warmly apologized to the neighbors standing outside the shop. He smiled, and said that he would see them again tomorrow. Then, he cleaned up the shop and closed the door early. When the door closed, the butcher shop seemed to be isolated from the outside world. It seemed that the noise had also suddenly left this place. Rue Xiaotian stretched his back, then turned his neck and moved his arms and walked toward the back of the shop. This shop was actually his home. The front was selling meat, and the back was a place to rest and live. He was still so young, so of course he was not married, and he did not have any relatives here. He was the only one in such a huge house. Just when Rue Xiaotian was about to walk back to his bedroom as usual, his body suddenly trembled when he walked through the corridor. He saw that there was suddenly an extra person in the small courtyard beside the corridor in the house. The courtyard was very small, only a few feet in length and width, so there was not much to put in. There was only a tree planted in the middle, a peach tree. This was the season when peach blossoms were in full bloom. Pink flowers bloomed all over the branches, and the wind that blew seemed to carry the intoxicating fragrance of peach blossoms. However, Rue Xiaotian's expression did not look good. There was surprise and shock on his face as he looked at the person who suddenly appeared in his house. It was a young and exceptionally beautiful woman. Hello. Amidst this suddenly frozen and stunned atmosphere, it was actually that beautiful and charming woman who was currently standing under the peach tree who smiled at him and then greeted him. Rue Xiaotian subconsciously swallowed his saliva and said, "Hello. Miss, how did you get in?" The door in front wasn't closed, so I walked in by myself. The beautiful woman smiled and looked very gentle. Rue Xiaotian looked back in surprise. In his impression, he should have closed the door every time. However, after thinking about it carefully, he seemed to be a little uncertain. He thought to himself, did this woman casually walk in while I was still selling meat? He coughed and said, "Miss, actually, I'm the only one living in this house. There's no one else here. I believe you also accidentally walked in. I'll take you out." As he said that, he turned around and made a pleased gesture. His attitude was gentle and polite. If the women on the street outside saw him, they would inevitably feel sorry for him. However, the beautiful woman in front of him seemed to be a little different. She smiled and looked at Rue Xiaotian, then nodded and said, "There's really something wrong with you." Chapter 414. The profession of a butcher is a matter of taking lives. Every day his hands are stained with blood, and he cuts off flesh and bones. Over the years, even the calmest person will be tempered into a violent and ruthless person. The woman looked at the butcher, Rue Xiaotian. Although she made him sound very fierce, there was no fear in her expression. She even smiled and said, "It's the first time I've seen a butcher as gentle and refined as you." Rue Xiaotian stood where he was, and his expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, "You're exaggerating. There are no absolutes in this world. Perhaps I'm an exception. Also, I don't think you just happen to pass by here. May I know your name?" The charming woman smiled and said, "My name is Song Wenji." Rue Xiaotian pondered for a moment, as if going through his memory. He then looked at Song Wenji and said, "I don't think I've known you before, Miss Song. May I know why you're looking for me?" Song Wenji didn't answer his question. She casually plucked a branch of peach blossom from the peach tree beside her and sniffed it lightly. Then, she said lightly, "How can there be so many coincidences in this world? It's just that everyone can't see that far ahead. You're pretending to be a butcher, but you don't look like one. There are probably only two possibilities." Rue Xiaotian sounded a little curious. He said, "I'll have to ask you about that." "Please teach me," Mississippi Song Wenji said. "I wouldn't dare to teach you. I'm just spouting nonsense. The first possibility is that you've been pretending to be a butcher all along. You've been using this line of work to cover your tracks. You've never been a butcher, so your temperament naturally hasn't changed." Rue Xiaotian nodded and said, That makes sense. What about the second possibility?" Song Wenji looked at the young and handsome butcher and said with a smile, "The second possibility is that although you're really a butcher now, you've done things more ruthless than a butcher in the past. You've killed so many people that you've naturally become numb to it. Am I right?" Rue Xiaoyan's expression turned cold, and he suddenly stopped talking. The small courtyard suddenly quietened down. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the peach tree could be heard. Other than that, the atmosphere suddenly turned somber. Separated by a corridor, the man and the woman stared at each other coldly. After some time, Rue Xiaoyan suddenly said, "Miss Song, who exactly are you, and why are you looking for me?" Just as Song Wenji was about to speak, a series of knocks came from the door of the butcher shop that was already closed. Song Wenji and Rue Xiaoyan's expressions did not change much. They were still looking at each other with a hint of vigilance in their eyes, and they did not intend to look elsewhere. After a while, Rue Xiaoyan said in a clear voice, "This shop is closed. Please go back and come back early tomorrow." The knocks on the door stopped, probably having heard Rue Xiaoyan's words. Rue Xiaoyan looked at Song Wenji, took a deep breath, and was about to speak again. Knock, 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 knock. Suddenly, the same knocking sound came from the door again, and it broke the tranquility of this place once more. This time, Song Wenji and Rue Xiaoyan's expressions changed. They looked at each other almost at the same time, but then they saw the surprise in each other's eyes. It seemed that the possibility of the other party's helper could be ruled out. Rue Xiaoyan was silent for a moment, then turned to the door, raised his voice, and said with a hint of sternness, "This shop is closed for the day. Please go back." Knock, 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 knock. The knocks on the door seemed to completely ignore his words, and they were still knocking persistently. For a moment, the shop was in complete silence, and it seemed that only the strange and inexplicable knocks on the door were still echoing. Rue Xiaoyan's expression became a little strange. After a moment of silence, he looked at Song Wenji and pointed in the direction of the door. Song Wenji hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Rue Xiaoyan turned and walked to the door. He did not walk fast, and it could be seen that his hands were always by his side as he walked. He did not even swing them naturally like ordinary people, which made his walking posture look a little awkward and strange. Song Wenji soon noticed this. She stared at Rue Xiaoyan, and a hint of contemplation flashed across her eyes. The butcher's shop was only so big, so it did not take long for Rue Xiaoyan to reach the door. Just as he was about to reach out to open the door, the knocks on the door suddenly disappeared. Without any warning, he suddenly disappeared. Like a ghost, the silence instantly occupied the small courtyard, and Rue Xiaoyan, who had just raised his hand, froze. The door was still tightly shut, but the knocks outside the door were gone. It was as if the person who had been waiting outside for a long time had finally lost his patience and left at that moment. However, neither Rue Xiaoyan nor Song Wenji believed this possibility. Their expressions were a little ugly. After a while, Rue Xiaoyan reached out and opened the door. The noise from the street outside could be heard, but there was no one outside the butcher's shop. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the knocks just now had never happened. Rue Xiaoyan stood at the door and watched for a while before quietly closing the door again. He turned around and walked back to face Song Wenji again. He frowned and said, "Miss Song, who exactly are you?" Song Wenji thought about it and said, "I'm from Zhengxianming." Zhengxianming? Rue Xiaoyan was stunned for a moment, and he seemed to be a little surprised by the answer. He then frowned and said, "I don't think I've ever offended Zhengxianming." "Why are you looking for me?" Song Wenji was about to speak, but her and Rue Xiaoyan's expressions changed almost at the same time, and they turned to look. At the other end of the courtyard, Rue Xiaoyan's bedroom was at the end of the corridor. At this moment, the door of the bedroom suddenly squeaked and opened. A man walked out of the room and stood at the door. He met Rue Xiaoyan and Song Wenji's gazes and smiled. "Hello, I'm Lu Chun." Rue Xiaoyan's pupils shrank slightly. He looked at Lu Chun and then at the charming woman standing under the peach tree, Song Wenji. His expression finally lost its smile and calmness, and he shouted with a hint of anger, "Who are you? Also, how dare you break into my bedroom?" Lu Chun's expression was calm, as if he didn't care about Rue Xiaoyan's harsh words. He just said indifferently, "I'm also from Zhengxianming. As for my identity, I should be the one asking you. Rue Xiaotian flew into a rage. Just as he was about to scold him, he heard Lu Chun say, "Stop pretending. Ordinary people won't secretly make two escape routes in their own homes. Let me be frank. One is in the bedroom behind me, and you can't get through it. As for the other one, Miss Song hasn't done anything from the beginning to the end. She's just standing under the peach tree, so the second escape route must be under the peach tree, under her feet. Am I right?" He said to Rue Xiaotian with a smile, looking like he was looking at a dog in a desperate situation. Chapter 415. The three people in the courtyard formed a triangle. After Lu Chun said that last sentence, there was a long period of silence. Rue Xiaotian's expression changed rapidly, turning green and white. Meanwhile, Song Wenji's attention seemed to have shifted from the young butcher to Lu Chun. She stared at Lu Chun with her bright and watery eyes, seemingly sizing up the man who had suddenly appeared curiously. After a while, Rue Xiaotian's expression turned cold, and he said coldly, "What are the two of you trying to do by barging into my house uninvited? Is Zheng Xiaming so arrogant that he can't tolerate a person like me who stand aloof from worldly affairs? Because you stand aloof from worldly affairs, so you like to dig a hole in the ground alone?" Lu Chen asked. Rue Xiaotian's expression became more and more terrible. Just as he was about to flare up, he suddenly heard Song Wenji ask, "Who are you?" The two men were stunned because Song Wenji did not speak to Rue Xiaotian this time. Instead, she looked at Lu Chun and asked, "You say that you work for Zheng Xiaming, but I've never seen you before. I'd like to ask, which hall under Zheng Xiaming do you belong to?" This beautiful woman had a gentle smile on her face, but her words weren't very polite. Lu Chun frowned and glanced at her. However, in the blink of an eye, he was suddenly stunned. He saw the charming and beautiful Song Wenji standing under the blooming peach tree in front of him. When the spring breeze blew past the treetops, the peach blossoms trembled and shone brilliantly. The person under the flowers was incomparably beautiful. It suddenly overlapped with a certain scene in his memory. At that moment, Lu Chun seemed to be stunned. Song Wenji also furrowed her beautiful and delicate brows. She was naturally very confident in her own appearance. She was also well aware of her own charm. After all, relying on these things, she had even grabbed onto the world's most powerful backer. Because of this, she would often encounter other men who were attracted by her beauty. Most of the time, she would just laugh it off. Those who knew her background would keep a respectful distance from her, and those who didn't know her background were far worse than her, so it wasn't worth getting angry over. However, one afternoon, she suddenly felt that the man named Lu Chun was looking at her very strangely. She wasn't disgusted or disgusted by it. She just felt that it was a little strange. In that man's eyes, there was no greed, desire, jealousy, possessiveness, or even some hidden brutality that other men around her had when they looked at her in the past. Song Wenji even felt that this man called Lu Chun didn't seem to be looking at her, even though his eyes were looking at the peach tree at that moment. His eyes were gloomy and somewhat empty, as if his gaze had actually penetrated his own body and was looking at a place even further away. He seemed to be looking at something else. He seemed to be looking at someone else? Who is that person? In the great hall of Heavenly Law Hall, on a wide and lofty throne, Taihu Immortal, who was revered by the world, gently hugged Song Wenji and asked her with a smile. Song Wenji nestled beside this old, but still incomparably powerful old man. Her intelligent and charming eyes flashed. As if thinking for a moment, she said, "I don't know about this after all. I have never seen this Lu Chun before. But the way I looked at him, he probably thought of someone else from me, maybe also a woman." She pouted and said in a low voice, looking a little unhappy and a little angry. Taihu Immortal immediately broke into laughter. He stretched out his hand and lovingly pinched Song Wenji's fair and delicate little face. He said with a smile, "There is no shadow of this. You really know how to let your imagination run wild." Song Wenji didn't laugh. Instead, She pursed her lips and said with a little coquettishness and determination, I have this kind of feeling, and my feeling is very accurate. Good, good, good. You are right, you are right. Taihu Immortal was a little helpless, but he still raised his hand and shook it affectionately. Then he asked again, did he tell you his identity in the end? And what is the background of that butcher? Song Wenji said, that butcher called Rue Xiaodian really has some tricks up his sleeves. While I was talking with that Lu Chun, he suddenly pressed some unknown mechanism, and several places in the courtyard exploded at the same time. The power was really not small, and that Lu Chun and I were caught off guard. We were busy dodging, but he took advantage of the chaos and slipped away. Escaped? Taihu Immortal frowned slightly. Song Wenji nodded. If it were other subordinates of Heavenly Law Hall who saw Taihu Immortal's dignified appearance, they would probably be so scared that their legs would turn to jelly. But Song Wenji's expression was calm, as if she didn't care at all, and Taihu Immortal really didn't blame her at all. And then, which Immortal Alliance Hall does that Lu Chun belong to? Taihu Immortal asked Song Wenji. Song Wenji said he didn't say. I wanted to keep him, but this person's ability is very strange, and it is very different from the common Dao and divine powers. I was not careful, and actually let him escape. Taihu Immortal was silent for a moment, and said, so it seems that this person is most likely from Fuyunji. First, this name list originally came from Fuyunji. Other than us, if someone else came, probably only Fuyunji would do it. Second, who knows how many monsters of unknown origin and identity are hidden in Fuyunji. This area has always been unfathomable, and such strange people are the most common. Song Wenji nodded and said, Godfather, you are right. In fact, before this, I also suspected Fuyunji, but I really didn't have any evidence, so I didn't dare say it. At this point, she paused and said, but about that Rue Xiaodian who ran away, I feel that he is a bit like a person. Taihu Immortal raised his eyebrows and said, who is it? Rue M.O., ranked third among the 5 devils of Bloodwing sect. Taihu Immortal looked deeply at Song Wenji and said, why do you say so? Song Wenji said, legend has it that Rue M.O. is most proficient in mechanisms and unorthodox techniques. Every time he goes to a place, he would often secretly explore and set up layers of mechanisms, which is very much like his style. Also, the surname Rue is the same as Rue M.O. You should know that there are not many people with the surname Rue in this world. Taihu Immortal was silent for a moment and shook his head. You have talked for a long time, but there is no concrete evidence, so you can't take it seriously. Song Wenji didn't seem to be too surprised by Taihu Immortal's reaction. Perhaps she knew that this deity stage true lord, who had always been fair and honest, was like this. But at this time, she didn't care about the background of the two men because she had more important things to say to Taihu Immortal. Godfather, I thought of something. Say it. If our previous guess is correct, Fuyunji and Bloodwing sect are involved in today's matter. From this, I also thought of the matter with Bloodwing sect. Lord Tianlan didn't give you face. Humph. Taihu Immortal snorted coldly without expression, but didn't say anything. Song Wenji gently pulled his arm and then said in a low voice, if this is really the case, I think there's a way to let you go to Lord Tianlan and fight back. Taihu Immortal was startled, looking slightly surprised, and then said with a smile, I didn't expect you to be so smart now. Tell me about it. Song Wenji smiled and said with a charming face, Lord Tianlan took 2 people who defected to the enemy and pretended to be good people. Then you can do the same. Taihu Immortal's heart moved, and then he revealed a trace of a smile, and said, don't tell me you mean, Song Wenji said with a smile, of the 5 demons of Bloodwing sect, 2 ran away, and the remaining ones are probably the 3 brothers. The woman leaned against Taihu Immortal, and then said with a smile, the same thing. That lord did. Can't you do it? Taihu Immortal clapped his hands and laughed, and said, exactly. Chapter 416. Who is that woman? Have you seen her before? In a courtyard deep in the alley of Horse Washing Bridge, Lu Chun and Old Ma sat in the courtyard and drank together. After drinking a cup of wine, Lu Chun asked Old Ma. Old Ma shook his head and said, "I have never seen that woman, so I really don't know where she came from." As he spoke, he paused and pondered for a moment before continuing. "For the first 10 years, you and I lived in Qingshitang village. In recent years, after you escaped to the south to the land of chaos, I only helped out with some trivial matters. In the end, I moved to Qingshitang village. Hence, apart from knowing a little about the Floating Clouds agency, I basically know nothing about the other halls in the Immortal Alliance." Lu Chun nodded. It seemed like he knew what Old Ma was talking about. After thinking for a moment, he said, "That woman claimed to be from Xingxiaming, but I don't think she's from Fuyunji. Otherwise, there would be news from that damn Baldy in Shuang. How about this? When you have time, go and find out if there's a woman called Song Wenji in the Immortal Alliance. Find out where she came from." Old Ma said, "No problem. Leave it to me." Lu Chun smiled and reached for the wine pot. He started pouring wine into Old Ma's and his own cups. The next morning, Lu Chun and Old Ma woke up early. After tidying up, as usual, Lu Chun threw a large piece of demon beast meat to Atsu and sent the black dog away. These few days, Atsu lived like a deity. Every day, it either ate or slept. Apart from the fact that it couldn't drink, it was really a drunken life. After sending Atsu away, Lu Chun and Old Ma walked out together. Old Ma said to Lu Chun, "Today I will go to Fuyunji to find Hall Leader Shuaying and tell her about the recent events. I will also ask about the woman from yesterday." Lu Chun nodded and said, "Okay, go. But I'm afraid you won't get an answer soon. Don't rush back today. Do your work there." Old Ma looked at him and said, "What about you? Where do you plan to go today? Are you going to find the next person on the list?" Lu Chun hesitated and shook his head. "No, I will stop for today. I feel that this matter is a bit strange. There seems to be something I don't understand. I need to think more about it." After a pause, he said to Old Ma, "Today, I will find a chance to go to the butcher shop from yesterday to see if there is anything else I missed. That Rue Xiaoyan's identity must be strange. Maybe that woman called Song Wenji knows something?" Old Ma nodded and said, "That's good. Be careful." After saying that, he left. Lu Chun watched Old Ma's back disappear into the busy street under the horse-washing bridge. After staring for a long time, he turned a corner and walked on another road. Of course, the butcher shop from yesterday did not open for business today. This also made the ladies in the neighborhood, who usually liked to buy meat here, very disappointed. Before Lu Chun came, he was a little worried that these people might go to the butcher shop to see what was going on. If they did, the situation inside would inevitably be exposed. In a lightning-fast battle yesterday, the mysterious butcher Rue Xiaotian suddenly triggered some traps, causing chaos and taking the opportunity to escape. Then, Lu Chun and Song Wenji couldn't catch up, and each had their own concerns, so they left one after another. However, those traps were set in the house. In fact, from the outside, at least there was nothing wrong with the butcher shop. This was what Lu Chun was worried about when he came over. However, to his surprise, although the butcher shop was closed, it did not attract the attention of anyone, including the ladies in the neighborhood who came here every day to buy meat or to look at its face. Some of them walked to the door of the butcher shop and often stopped for a moment before turning around and walking away. They did not have any intention of knocking on the door to inquire. This also made Lu Chun feel a little surprised. After a while, when no one went over, Lu Chun walked out from a hidden corner on the opposite street, and then pretended to be passing by, walking in front of the butcher shop. In the next moment, he suddenly frowned, as he found that there was a note pasted on the door of the butcher's shop, with a few lines written on it. The owner's mother is seriously ill, and had to return overnight to take care of her. Our shop will be temporarily closed for a month. Please forgive us for any inconvenience caused. The note was not particularly large, but it was still very conspicuous on the door. At the same time, the handwriting on it was neat and tidy, and it looked not bad. It was probably because of this note that the women who came over had to leave. Lu Chun did not stop in front of the butcher's shop, and even his eyes seemed to only glance at the note before walking over. An hour later, Lu Chun had already jumped in from a hidden wall at the back of the house without anyone noticing. The house was silent, and there was no movement at all. However, the messy debris scattered on the ground seemed to be telling the story of the sudden chaos yesterday. As for the original owner of the house, he was naturally nowhere to be found. Lu Chun stood in the small courtyard and thought about it, but he still could not find any clues from the magic power that Rue Xiaotian used when he escaped yesterday. He turned around and saw the peach tree from yesterday. The blooming peach blossoms were swaying in the spring breeze, and it seemed like nothing had changed compared to the mess around it. This peach tree was probably the only thing that was still neat and beautiful. Lu Chun stared at the blooming peach blossoms for a while, then walked over and entered Rue Xiaotian's bedroom. He was no stranger to this room. In fact, he had already searched this place carefully the day before and found a secret passage. However, apart from that, he did not find anything valuable. It seemed like he had more time today, so he searched more carefully than yesterday. However, as time passed, when he walked out of the bedroom again, what he found was exactly the same as the day before. However, Lu Chun did not look depressed. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about something. After pondering for a moment, he muttered to himself, "It's actually so clean? Could it be that he's also a shadow?" After standing at the door and thinking for a while, he walked towards the peach tree in the small courtyard. He had basically searched every place in this house, but Rue Xiaotian was so clean that he did not leave anything that could be used to trace his identity. Lu Chun even felt that if he had not seen Rue Xiaotian selling meat here with his own eyes yesterday, he might not have believed that this person lived here. However, there was one last place left. There were two secret passages in this house, one in the bedroom and the other under the peach tree. Song Wenji had been standing under this peach tree yesterday and did not leave. Lu Chun had always suspected that there was something strange about that place, so he had to search it thoroughly today. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he had already walked under the peach tree. A breeze blew past, and his clothes fluttered slightly. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to the season when peach blossoms were in full bloom in Qingshitang village. Chapter 417. Lu Chun stood silently under the peach tree for a while, and his eyes became clear. He looked at the peach tree from head to toe, circled around it, and then patted the trunk with his hand. Listening to the low and solid sound coming from under his hand, Lu Chun could not help but frown slightly. Of course, the peach tree was real. From the pink peach blossoms on the branches to the roots of the tree, it was a real peach tree that was growing well. However, there was indeed a secret passage hidden under the peach tree, which Lu Chun had discovered when he came over yesterday. The woman named Song Wenji had been standing there, intentionally or unintentionally, blocking the young butcher's escape route. In the end, Rue Xiaotian was forced to detonate the final mechanism and escape in the chaos. Since the peach tree was real, the mechanism that could control the underground secret passage should not be on the tree. Lu Chun pondered for a moment, then squatted down and began to search the ground carefully, ignoring the dirt on the ground and the various junk left by the explosion yesterday. He searched the ground very carefully and skillfully, as if he had done this kind of thing more than once before. On this quiet morning, in this abandoned house, a man was lying on the ground, carefully searching for something under the peach tree. This scene looked funny, and a little strange. However, this situation did not last for long. Lu Chun's body suddenly trembled, and he suddenly raised his head to look at the other end of the courtyard of the house. There was a trace of surprise and vigilance on his face. A figure gently flipped over from the wall over there and landed on the ground. In the next moment, she also saw Lu Chun, who was still lying on the ground in the courtyard, and she was stunned for a moment. A gentle breeze blew past, sweeping past the blooming peach blossoms, bringing with it a few pink petals that floated and fell with the wind, floating on the ground between them. They looked at each other for a moment, and then Lu Chun sighed and said, "Why are you here?" Standing under the wall was an exceptionally beautiful girl who even looked a little ethereal. It was White Lotus. At this moment, after the initial surprise, White Lotus quickly regained her composure. After smiling slightly, she walked over and stopped not far from Lu Chen. She smiled and said, "I'm here to look for you." Lu Chen clapped his hands and simply sat on the ground, too lazy to stand up. He said, "Why didn't you enjoy yourself in Zhengxiaming on Sky Dragon Mountain and come down the mountain to look for me? There's nothing here that's worth your time. If you really have so much time, I think you might as well hang out with that perfected Lord Tianlan. As long as he's in a good mood one day and teaches you a few moves, it should be enough for you to enjoy." However, White Lotus looked like she didn't care. She giggled and threw away her usual cold, fairy-like appearance. Instead, she had a bit of a temper that a girl of her age should have. After curling her lips, she said, "I'm too lazy to stay on that mountain. It's so boring all day. Not to mention other things. Just in the main hall of Zhengxiaming on the mountain, you have to be careful of anyone. No one knows when the big shots behind them will suddenly be pulled out. It's so annoying." "Is that so?" Lu Chen smiled. Unconsciously, he felt that the girl in front of him, whom he hadn't seen for years, was much more pleasing to the eye than he remembered. He nodded and said, "You don't know how lucky you are. Maybe the lifelong dream of others is to be favored by a perfected lord of the divine transformation realm like you." White Lotus snorted and said disapprovingly, "What's there to dream about? I don't think there's anything strange about it. What about you? If it were you, would you feel flattered by such favor?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect White Lotus to ask such an abrupt question, which caught him off guard. After pondering for a moment, Lu Chen suddenly smiled and shook his head. "Well, I'll probably have the same reaction as you. I really didn't misjudge you." White Lotus looked very happy. She even clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Well, don't talk nonsense. What are you doing here now?" Lu Chen didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "How did you know I was here, and why did you come here?" White Lotus laughed and said, "I already expected you to ask this question." She said, "I met Old Ma this morning and found out from him." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Impossible. What kind of friendship does Old Ma have with you? It would be strange if he told you so clearly. If he told you to go to Kunlun Mountain thousands of miles away to find me, I might believe it more." White Lotus's face darkened. She said, "What? Is Old Ma such a bad person?" Lu Chen sternly said, "Yeah, rotten to the core, rotten to the core." White Lotus chuckled, looking like the beautiful peach blossoms beside her. Then she said with a smile, "Well, in fact, Marshal Uncle Tianlan told me that I had nothing to do. If I wanted to, I could come to work with you. Old Ma also heard this. Well, he told me your whereabouts." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then nodded. It seemed that he accepted White Lotus's words. Then, White Lotus glanced at the messy courtyard and rooms around and asked him what happened here. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but he still gave White Lotus a brief explanation of what had happened here. When he was done, he said to her, "According to my previous experience, I can see that there should be a secret passage hidden under this place, and a switch should be nearby. I was looking for it here, just now." White Lotus said, and took 2 steps forward. She looked a little curious and said, "Do you want me to help you?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "No need." After that, he stood up and continued to search nearby. White Lotus was not angry. She stood quietly behind him and found a stone to sit down. Looking at Lu Chen's back, a faint light flashed in her bright eyes. Lu Chen did not look back. After a moment, he suddenly said, "How are you doing now?" White Lotus shrugged and said, "Pretty good. At least no one on Sky Dragon Mountain dares to disrespect me. Maybe they all think that I will be the successor of Marshal Uncle Tianlan in the future." Lu Chen looked back at her and said, "Isn't it?" "No." Lu Chen responded and turned back to continue searching. But after a while, he suddenly said, "If it were me, I probably wouldn't treat you so well." White Lotus put her hands on her knees and looked at the man's back. She said, "Why? If it were you, what would you do to me?" Lu Chen did not look back. He was still carefully searching the ground in front of him. At the same time, he said lightly, "After all, You are the last disciple of Hakushin Jinkun. If it were me, I probably would have found a way to let you die without knowing why. White Lotus's expression changed slightly. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly heard a low, muffled sound, and then the ground under her feet trembled. After a moment, the ground under the peach tree suddenly sank, and then a narrow stone staircase extended downwards. Found it! Lu Chun stood up from the ground and said to White Lotus. Chapter 418. After discovering the entrance to the secret tunnel, Lu Chun did not enter it immediately. Instead, he stood outside the entrance and carefully observed it for a while. At the same time, he felt that there was a faint cold wind blowing out of the tunnel. He nodded slightly. Since there were signs of ventilation, it seemed that the tunnel below was not very shallow. There should be more to it. Lu Chun stood up and tidied up his clothes. He was about to go down when he suddenly saw White Lotus coming over from the corner of his eye. Lu Chun stopped and frowned. Why? Do you want to go down too? White Lotus said matter-of-factly, Marshal Uncle Tianlan asked me to help you. Of course, I will follow you. Besides, I'm a little curious about what's down there. Let's go down and have a look. Lu Chun said, we haven't figured out the identity and origin of these people. Maybe there will be some danger. Everything is fine for you. You are a superior person. Why do you come and take such a risk? White Lotus smiled and looked at Lu Chun. Are you talking about those who might die a violent death at any time and who don't even know why they died? Lu Chun glanced at her. White Lotus's expression did not change. It seemed that what she had just said had nothing to do with her. Lu Chun was silent for a moment. He suddenly sighed and turned to walk up the stone steps of the tunnel. At the same time, he said, be careful. If there is any danger, I won't protect you. White Lotus responded. It seemed that she did not take his words to heart. She just followed Lu Chun. The stone steps of the tunnel were made of very ordinary stone. There were no decorations on the walls on both sides of the tunnel. It was just that everything was square. Although it was simple and crude, it was relatively comfortable to walk. After walking down for a while, the light dimmed. However, Lu Chun was prepared for this. He took out a flint and wood torch from his arms and directly lit a torch. At this time, White Lotus, who was behind him, was a little surprised. She said in astonishment, do you actually carry a torch with you? How is that possible? Lu Chun said, didn't I decide to explore this secret passage before I came here? So, I naturally brought a torch in case of emergency. White Lotus replied with an, oh, and did not say anything else. As the two of them continued to descend, the surroundings were soon shrouded in darkness. Only the light from the torches illuminated the surroundings. White Lotus had unknowingly approached Lu Chun. This passageway was much longer than Lu Chun had imagined. Similarly, it was also much larger than the secret passageway he had found in the bedroom. In fact, the secret passage in the bedroom was more like a hidden vault. After walking for a short distance, it was just a small storage room. Lu Chun had already searched that area that day, but there was nothing worth paying attention to in the underground storeroom. It was precisely because of this that Lu Chun shifted his attention to this place. The cool wind blowing in their faces was still there. The light on the torch swayed from time to time, but the flame was burning very steadily. Obviously, there seemed to be plenty of air in this passageway. As Lu Chun walked, his eyes were staring ahead with great vigilance. But at this moment, he suddenly heard White Lotus suddenly ask him, Lu Chun, if you were Marshal Uncle Tianlan, would you really want to kill me? Lu Chun didn't even turn his head back as he continued walking forward. At the same time, he said, you're living a good life now, and your status is respected as well. Normally, you're not even grounded. Since perfected Lord Tianlan is so good to you, do you think he will easily kill you? White Lotus bit her lower lip and said in a low voice, but you just said that Marshal Uncle Tianlan is likely to want to kill me. Do you believe what I say? Lu Chun stopped and looked back at White Lotus. White Lotus was stunned and said, why? You still can't believe me? Lu Chun laughed and pointed to the front, saying, hurry up. I feel that the cold wind is a little stronger in front. We have probably reached the flat ground." White Lotus looked back and saw that the way they came was now covered by darkness. Even the entrance of the cave just now could not be seen. Her face was a little pale. She estimated in her heart that from the entrance of the cave to here, it was probably equivalent to walking down from the ground, and the vertical height was about 100 feet. This discovery surprised White Lotus a little, because a tunnel of such a scale in front of them must have consumed a lot of manpower and material resources, and it was almost impossible for an ordinary cultivator to do it, especially in this busy street. If someone found out or complained about the indiscriminate harvesting and digging, they would often look for the Heavenly Dragon Mountain's true immortal alliance to uphold justice. What was Rue Xiaoyan's background and identity? After walking for a while, the ground under their feet suddenly leveled out. Lu Chun whispered, "We are underground." As he said this, he raised the torch in his hand and began to illuminate the side. As the torch was raised high, the fire burned and gradually illuminated the surroundings. A moment later, Lu Chun and White Lotus suddenly exclaimed at almost the same time and exclaimed at the same time. With the help of the fire, Lu Chun and White Lotus saw where they were at the same time, as well as some of the surrounding areas. On the stone steps they came down just now, they could see that the stone steps and the stone walls next to them were almost newly built by outsiders. They were simple and meaningless. However, as they raised their torches, Lu Chun and Bai Lian suddenly realized that they had walked into a large underground passageway that was paved with huge stones. There were also some strange symbols carved into the walls on both sides, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that they were writing markings or something like that. Those characters, markings, and talisman inscriptions all looked very ancient. Even now, perhaps no one knew the meaning behind them. They did not understand why the predecessors had carved these things in this underground place. However, although they did not understand these words and marks, they still thought of something else from these things. Lu Chun did not say anything, but White Lotus suddenly said in a deep voice, "The relic, this is a part of the underground relic back then." Mount Tianlong was a spiritual mountain blessed on the Four River Plain. The land on and below the mountain were fertile and rich in spiritual energy. Perhaps there had been humans living here since a long time ago in ancient times. As for those ancient tribes, they lived here for a very long period of time before disappearing without a trace. Therefore, the relic had slowly become a ubiquitous place in the Immortal City. A long time ago, this large-scale relic had been famous all over the world, but it was sealed by powerful humans in the following days. And today, Lu Chun and White Lotus had only casually opened the door onto the peach blossom tree and actually found this secret passage. Who knew that it was deep underground and was actually connected to the relic? Lu Chun quietly looked at the situation in the surrounding passage. His eyes moved slightly, and after a moment, he suddenly pulled White Lotus and walked forward at the same time, saying, "Let's go take a look." Chapter 419. The Immortal City was where the headquarters of Zhengxiameng was located. It was also known as the most prosperous city in the world. Other than the fact that there were as many people as ants and cultivators as many as dogs, the most famous thing was that there were many ruins left from ancient times in this huge city without city walls. Among them, the most famous and eye-catching were, of course, the statues of the four great mythological beasts of the East, West, South, and North. To this day, there was still not a fifth huge statue that could compare to the statues of the four great mythological beasts. It was said that in the previous generation of Zhengxiameng, there was a great spiritual master who was proficient in this field who lived in the Immortal City for 70 years just to study these ruins. Then, when he was dying, he left behind a shocking discovery. Not many people in the world knew what this discovery was, because it was said that only a few divine transformation realm perfected cultivators of the previous generation of Zhengxiameng were present at that time. And when that spiritual master passed away, people only saw those divine transformation realm perfected cultivators walk out of the room with solemn expressions. Then, Zhang Xiaming buried that spiritual master with the highest ceremony. But from then on, no one ever heard of this matter again, and none of those divine transformation stage perfected monarchs ever mentioned anything about it again. This was a legend that was widely spread among the people of the Immortal City and even among the cultivators of the vast land of the Divine Land. It had not been extinguished for many years, and on this basis, there were also all kinds of guesses, variations, and even all kinds of stories. In the end, it was because those powerful, perfected cultivators of Zhang Xiaming suddenly took action many years ago. They valiantly and forcefully sealed the ancient ruins under the Immortal City. At the same time, they also buried the legend of those treasures that had been passed down for thousands of years in people's imagination. To this day, there were still countless people yearning for the mysterious and illusory treasures under the Immortal City. However, the seal back then was cast by a few perfected lords of the divine transformation realm at their peak. The power was simply unimaginable. At least, after so many years, no one was able to take a peek at the true, core secret of the underground relic. These things were well known in the human cultivation world and were not secrets. Therefore, when Lu Chun and White Lotus walked into the tunnel that looked like an ancient relic, they almost thought of these things at the same time. The patterns on the wall were obscure and distorted. At first glance, Lu Chun felt that they were somewhat similar to the totem patterns of the barbarians in the southern wilderness. But after careful observation, he found that there were many obvious differences between the two. At least for the time being, Lu Chun did not sense any dark power similar to the barbarian totem from the runes on the walls. The torch was still burning. White Lotus and Lu Chun's footsteps echoed in the wide passage. Looking at the neat stones on both sides, they walked forward for about 5 or 6 zhong. Suddenly, they stopped at the same time. The darkness in the tunnel was temporarily dispelled by the fire, but the tunnel in front of them came to an abrupt end. It looked like a large pile of rubble had collapsed from the dome, directly blocking the tunnel. There was no path ahead. Moreover, all the signs looked like a dead end. White Lotus let out a low and slightly disappointed cry, saying, "What's going on? It's blocked." Lu Chun walked forward, waved the torch in his hand, and carefully looked at the pile of rubble in front of him. Very soon, he found that it was tightly blocked, not even a gap. Moreover, there were layers upon layers of rubble in front of them. He was afraid that in the depths of this tunnel, the number of stones that had collapsed was not just a few, so there was no possibility of going further. He sighed, turned around, and said to White Lotus, "This is probably a corner at the edge of the underground ruins of the Immortal City. There are still some remnants outside the sealing spell, but it seems that we can't go further in." White Lotus nodded. Obviously, although she was not old, she had long known about the legend of the ancient ruins of the Immortal City. However, only the cultivators in the cultivation world would not be interested in the most mysterious, most magnificent, and most precious treasure in the world. Therefore, her face also showed a little regret. She muttered, as if she was a little angry and complained like a little girl, saying, "Ai, if only we could go in and take a look." Lu Chun smiled and first gestured for her to go back together. At the same time, he said, "This tunnel was left behind by the mysterious butcher. Obviously, he must have been here before. If he had found anything, he would have gone in long ago." White Lotus shrugged. It seemed that she did not have much objection to what Lu Chun said. However, perhaps she was still a little displeased with the man beside her, or perhaps she was not convinced, so she casually replied, "That's not necessarily true. Maybe he's not as smart as us." Lu Chun laughed and said, "That's right. But actually, the treasure in the ancient ruins is only a legend. No one knows what is actually inside. If after you go in, you don't find the treasure, and suddenly a large group of vicious and strange monsters and monsters suddenly jump out and directly eat a white and beautiful little girl like you, it would be too late for you to cry at that time." "Oof." White Lotus snorted. There was a look of dissatisfaction on her face. She said, "The legend of the ancient ruins has been around for so many years. You have never entered it before. How can you say that it's fake?" Lu Chun waved his hand and said, I didn't say that it's fake. I just feel that there are many loopholes in the story. It doesn't make sense. There are many problems. White Lotus's eyebrows twitched. She was a little more curious. She said, Oh, tell me. Lu Chun glanced at her, turned around, and walked forward. He said, I'm too lazy to say. You. White Lotus was instantly angered. She fiercely clenched her teeth and chased after Lu Chun and grabbed his sleeve. She said angrily, Tell me clearly. I'm too lazy to say anything. I think you're dissatisfied with me. Of course I'm dissatisfied with you. Lu Chun said. White Lotus was stunned again. It seemed that she didn't expect this man to be so direct and ruthless. After a moment of daze, the expression on her face eased a little. There was even a strange light in her eyes. She looked at Lu Chun for a moment and softened her voice. She said, You're such a strange person. All right then. What exactly do you have that you're dissatisfied with? Can you tell me? You wanted to kill my dog in the past. Lu Chun said. White Lotus frowned and said, It's just a useless dog. Is it worth making a fuss about? Lu Chun said seriously, Although Atsu is lazy, ugly, and gluttonous, it's not useless. White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, All right, all right. Anyway, it's your dog. It has nothing to do with me. But that was a few years ago. Now that I've met you, I didn't come up to fight and kill that dog. As a man, don't be so narrow-minded. Lu Chun sneered and said, Miss, you're used to being arrogant. You bullied others in the past, and now you can casually call others to let it go? Even if it's a dog, it's still my dog. I'm not happy. White Lotus was furious. She spat and said angrily, Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like this? Isn't it just a dog? I killed it when I wanted to. What do you want? Also, do you think I still have to rely on you? Get lost. After saying that, she turned around and strode forward, leaving Lu Chun alone. Lu Chun looked at her back as she walked into the darkness and shouted, Do you want a torch? Save the torch and burn yourself to death. White Lotus shouted at the last moment before she walked into the darkness. Then, she could no longer be seen. Lu Chun looked at the darkness. After a moment of silence, he suddenly shook his head and slowly turned around. However, he turned his head to look in the direction of the pile of rocks that had blocked his path. His eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 420. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the passage left behind by the ancient ruins. The torch in Lu Chun's hand suddenly fell from his hand and fell to the ground without warning. It bounced a few times and rolled a short distance to the side. The flame was still burning, but quickly became smaller during the rolling period, gradually becoming a weak flame, until finally, after twisting a few times, it quietly extinguished. Darkness returned here again. Lu Chun stood in the ancient underground passage without any light and closed his eyes, as if he was perceiving something. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes again, but at this time, there was a faint black flame slowly burning in the depths of his pupils. He also turned around and walked into the passage. The darkness covered all the routes, but Lu Chun seemed to be able to see everything in the darkness. Without any hesitation, he walked steadily and firmly, and then once again returned to the passage blocked by stones. He stretched out his hand in the darkness and touched the huge cold and hard stones. The rough feeling came from his fingertips, and then came the uneven and cracked stone gaps. He carefully groped, and no one knew what he felt. Behind him, the darkness also seemed to be silent, silently surrounding his figure, as if staring at what this strange figure was doing. Bai Yin jumped out from the tunnel with an angry look on her face. She cursed under her breath, but it seemed like she was still angry. She kicked a broken piece of wood in the air and flew in an arc before hitting a pillar on the opposite side of the corridor. Then it fell to the ground. Bai Yin looked at Bai Lian and 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 Bai Lian. White Lotus, who was usually quiet and cold like a little fairy, had long lost her interest in pretending at the moment. She angrily paced back and forth a few times on the side of the tunnel. The more she thought about it, the more annoyed she became. Suddenly, she spat at the bottom of the tunnel and said, "Stinky man, what are you proud of? If it weren't for that damn Baldy Tianlon who insisted that I come to help you, do you think I would be willing to come? Ever since Master died, the people I've met are getting weirder and weirder." After cursing for a while, White Lotus's anger subsided a little, but her expression was still ugly. She didn't care about anything else. With a cold snort, she turned around and walked out. It seemed that her temper had flared up and she didn't care about anything else. She didn't want to stay here any longer, and she didn't want to see Lu Chen again. He quickly walked past the small courtyard, arrived at the corridor, and then walked towards the main door. The house behind him was quiet, only a gust of spring wind blowing from afar, rustling the blooming peach trees, adding a little quiet rustling to the quiet time here. White Lotus's footsteps slowed down. When she reached the door, she stopped. For some reason, she didn't reach out to open the door. Her beautiful and delicate brows slightly furrowed, and the anger on her face unknowingly dissipated. Instead, she revealed a puzzled expression. "Something's not right," White Lotus muttered to herself. After a while, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were clear and bright, and with a somewhat thoughtful expression, she stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the peach tree in the courtyard. The pitch-black darkness covered Lu Chen's figure, and the black flame in his eyes didn't leak out at all, allowing the black fire in his eyes to gradually grow bigger and bigger. His hand had been groping on the wall of ruins formed by the rubble until his palm suddenly touched a flat, broken stone. It was an inconspicuous place among the rubble, but after groping in the dark for a long time, Lu Chen almost immediately felt that this place was different. This stone had a nearly round surface and a smooth surface in sharp contrast to the rough surface of the surrounding rubble. It gave people the feeling that it was part of a pillar or something made of a particularly smooth stone a long time ago. The black fire in his eyes flickered, as if he was a little hesitant at that moment. But after a while, Lu Chen lowered his head but placed one side of his cheek and ear on this round stone. A cold feeling instantly seeped into his face, causing Lu Chen to frown. But he didn't retreat, and instead slightly narrowed his eyes, carefully listening to something. Behind that stone, what was it? What was in the depths of this ancient ruin? Perhaps there was nothing, other than the cold feeling seeping out from the stone. He didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. Behind this cold stone, perhaps there were even more empty stone caves. There was no movement, no sound. Everything seemed to be deathly silent. Lu Chen silently waited for a while, but still didn't find anything. He could only prepare to get up, but at this moment, within his chest, his heart suddenly jumped. If there was light at this moment, he could clearly see that in this man's eyes, the two balls of black fire, at that moment, seemed to be startled by a sudden gust of wind, twisting and distorting, only returning to normal after a while. Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up. As if he felt something, he couldn't help but stretch out his finger to knock on the surface of the stone twice. Pa! Pa! The sounds were low and clear, but this time there was no response. It was as if the sudden palpitation he felt was just an illusion in the darkness. Lu Chen tried a few times, but there was no reaction. In the end, Lu Chen was finally at his wit's end and slowly stood up. Until now, he still couldn't confirm whether there was anything strange behind this wall of ruins, and if there was, what strange thing would it be? But just now, the power behind the distant stone wall that suddenly resonated with the power of the black fire in his body made him faintly feel that there seemed to be some secret hidden here. Yes, from the beginning until the end, the ancient words and talisman markings on the walls didn't affect him in the slightest. Instead, it was the mysterious thing behind the wall of ruins that aroused his interest. But even so, at this moment, he seemed to have walked into a dead end. Thinking about it, those deity transformation stage, true monarchs, all had earth-shattering magical powers, casting spells to seal these ruins for hundreds of years without any problems, of course. It was impossible for them to be shaken like him. Perhaps there was nothing at all, and it was just a misunderstanding. Lu Chen sighed. straightened his body, and wanted to leave, but after a moment of thought, he casually stretched out his fingers, and two black flames surged out from his fingertips, carrying a trace of indescribable and strange aura. And just like that, he knocked on the stone twice. Papa, like a sudden knock on the door in a quiet afternoon, it echoed in this passage. There was no reaction. Lu Chun turned around, walked into the darkness, and quickly disappeared. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly in this darkness, in a certain corner of the wall of ruins, on a certain stone, a soft and weak voice suddenly sounded. Pa, 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 pa. Chapter 421. White Lotus stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the blossoming peach tree for a while, her expression fluctuating, but the initial anger had completely disappeared, leaving behind only a pondering expression. After a while, she suddenly straightened her expression. As if she had made up her mind, she strode towards the entrance. Just that, when she reached the entrance, she suddenly heard a burst of footsteps below. A moment later, Lu Chen's figure walked out from the darkness, following the stone steps to the ground. A breeze blew, white petals with a tinge of pink floated down from the tree, landing on their shoulders and lapels. They looked at each other. Lu Chun was the first to speak. I thought you had already left. White Lotus looked at his eyes. The corner of her eyes swept over the black hole on the ground. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Why did you take so long to come up?" The road was too dark, not easy to walk. White Lotus glanced at his palm, said, "Where's your torch?" "Oh, I burned it halfway and suddenly ran out of fire, so I had to throw it down there," Lu Chen said. The corner of White Lotus's mouth slightly twitched, but she did not say anything more. After a while, she turned around, silently walked to the main door, opened the door, and walked out. "What we're doing now, do you really understand in your heart?" Deep in the alley of Shima Qiao, Old Ma and Lu Chun sat on the grass in the courtyard, looking at the already dark sky. Behind the faint dark clouds were even more twinkling stars, and then suddenly asked Lu Chun this question. It was rare that Atsu did not eat meat in big mouthfuls, nor did it sleep soundly, only quietly lying beside Lu Chun. Probably it also felt that this was a rare time to spend with Lu Chun, at least for the past few days. Lu Chun used his hand to gently stroke the fur on top of Atsu's head, faintly said, "Of course I know. Even though I didn't like that damn Baldy, we were still on the same page when it came to dealing with the devil cult. He came up with a plan, and I thought it might work, so I helped him do it." Old Ma glanced at him, sighed, and said nothing. Lu Chen's hand moved from Atsu's head to its stomach. After the familiar warm feeling, he felt that Atsu seemed to have grown fatter than before. It was no wonder. He ate, drank, and slept like a pig every day. No matter what, he would become fat. He patted Atsu's stomach lightly and said, "He said that to destroy the source of belief of the devil cult, the first thing we have to do is to find a few divine objects in their hands. Some of the divine objects must be in the Immortal City. So, what we have to do now is to find those rats hiding in the dark corners of this city, right?" Old Ma frowned and said, "But we found a few people, and none of them seem to have anything to do with the devil cult." Lu Chun shook his hand and said, "That's not right." "What do you mean?" "It's not that they have nothing to do with the devil cult. It's that we haven't found any evidence of them having anything to do with the devil cult. Among these people, some of their whereabouts are unknown, and some of them were killed before we could find them. We still don't know what secrets they have behind them." After a pause, Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma and said, "Did you go to Fiyunji to ask about this?" Old Ma nodded and said, "I've talked to Home Master Shuang. She admitted that she was the one who submitted the list to Supreme Tianlan, but she also said that there are no traitors among her subordinates. At least, most of them are loyal and reliable people. However, she will investigate this matter in private." Speaking of this, Old Ma hesitated and said, "Why don't you ask him the next time you see him?" "It's no use." Lu Chun said straightforwardly, "What kind of person is that damn Baldy? He has so many big and small things in his hands all day long." It's impossible for him to check this list one by one. At most, he will ask his subordinates to do it. It's almost the same as asking us to do things for him. But in Fuyunji, someone must have leaked the secret. Old Ma snorted as if he had already expected this. He said, "We've already talked about this a few years ago. The true Immortal Alliance's halls are like sieves now. They're leaking like crazy. I thought it would be better in Fuyunji, but now it looks like it's almost the same." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Anyway, we still have to do what we have to do. Since Rue Xiaotian ran away and we can't find him, let's continue to look for the people behind him." Old Ma nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "By the way, I got some information about the woman you asked me to investigate the other day." Lu Qin raised his eyebrows and said, "Who is she? What's her background?" Old Ma said, "There's indeed a woman named Song Wenji in the Heavenly Law Hall of the Immortal Allies. She has a powerful background. She is the adopted daughter of the highly respected Immortal Tiehu." Lu Chun was stunned and said, "The adopted daughter of Immortal Tiehu?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes. Because Immortal Tiehu has no children, he values his only adopted daughter very much and tries to cultivate her. It can be said that she is one of the most popular young people in the Heavenly Law Hall." Lu Qin thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. He said, "It seems that Immortal Tiehu doesn't like that damn Baldy." Old Ma also smiled and said, "That's true. That lord has indeed disliked us for many years." Lu Chun waved his hand and said with a trace of laziness, "Who cares? Let these big shots fight for these trivial matters. We just need to do our own things." He put his hands under his head and closed his eyes. He mumbled something. Old Ma didn't hear it clearly and asked, "What did you say?" Lu Chan closed his eyes and said, "I hope the person we are looking for tomorrow is still alive." In the spring of this year, the weather in the Immortal City where Zhengxiaming was located was pleasant. Hundreds of flowers were in full bloom. Not only peach blossoms, but also countless beautiful flowers bloomed in this season, decorating the city extraordinarily beautiful. And at this time, in Zhengxiaming, which had always been calm, at least on the surface, for many years, a piece of strange news suddenly came out. The 5 devils of the Bloodwing sect of EC that Zhengxiaming had suppressed a while ago had suddenly abandoned the darkness and entered the light. All of them had been absorbed by Zhengxiaming. However, among them, 2 first surrendered to Immortal Tianlan, while the other 3 had inexplicably joined the Heavenly Law Hall of another deity stage Immortal, Tiehu. For a moment, everyone inside and outside Zhengxiaming cast sidelong glances at each other. There seemed to be some faint tension between these 2 big shots who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world. And in the surging undercurrents, there was another matter that was not so obvious, although perhaps this matter itself was much more important. Immortal Guyu, another big shot who was in charge of the Starry Hall in Zhengxiaming, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 deity stage immortals in Zhengxiaming one day, inviting them to the Starry Hall for a discussion. It had been many, many years since all 6 deity stage immortals in Zhengxiaming had gathered together. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.